Baby for the Bear by Amy Starr. A paranormal, bear shifter romance via romancely.com. Chapter 1.
In spite of everything else, the unemployment check arrived right on schedule. Samantha Vance came to the front entrance of her building, carrying the bag of groceries that she had bought with what she still had in the bank for one of buying it with a paycheck, and gratefully plucked the unemployment check and the other mail that she dreaded to look at from her mailbox before heading upstairs. At least this little cushion beneath her could be counted on for a while, where what she had thought would be a steady and well-paying job had proved to be not so reliable. She headed up to the apartment that she actually liked, but where she now wondered how long she would be able to stay, and was almost oblivious to the act of setting the bag and her purse down on the sofa while she sorted through the little bundle of mail in her other hand. Samantha could almost predict the content of what the postman had brought besides that one little lifeline of insurance money. Yep, she thought to herself as she flipped from one envelope to the next and dropped each one on the coffee table with about the same presence of mind as she had dropped the grocery bag on the sofa. All the usual suspects were here except for the student loan invoice, the invoice for her car loan, and the payment statement for the gym that came in her email. There was an offer of a credit card that she wouldn't have taken even if she did still have the income that had gotten her the apartment. The one credit card she had, for which she could now barely make the payments, was all she cared to have. There was the offer of a new cell phone and a great deal on service that was now not so great. And yes, there was the cable TV bill for service that she would probably have to cancel after this month and switch to watching whatever television was available to her online. At least her internet service came with the apartment in which she was growing to fear, day by day, that her days were numbered. All the other envelopes Samantha let drop onto the coffee table except for that one containing the check that was not the equal of the paychecks to which she had so quickly grown accustomed, but was now all that she had to work with. She let out a blubbering sigh of frustration that rustled aside the lock of curly blonde hair that had fallen over her face, and shook her head. For the moment at least, the feeling that churned in her stomach was more anxiety than hunger. But she honestly wondered if she could turn this situation around before hunger overtook anxiety. Forgetting the purchases still lying on the sofa waiting to be unpacked and stored in the refrigerator or cabinets, Samantha walked over to the mirror over the non-functioning fireplace in her living room and took a good, long look at the pretty, 24-year-old girl staring back at her from the glass. Things just aren't going according to plan. Are they, Sammy? She thought to the reflection of her very pretty but now very anxious young face, wreathed in curly golden hair that tumbled over her shoulders. And what was the plan? Go to college. Major in economics. Get good grades. Get a good job. Work steadily. Earn enough money to move away from mom and dad and be completely on her own in her own place, with no roommates or housemates underfoot. Be a professional in a responsible job. Have a life. Step by step, it was all perfectly simple except that life has a mocking and perverse way of mocking the steps one takes. Life had mocked Sammy Vance by throwing in her path the actions of the very kind of corporate go-getters that she was trying to become. She was so proud of herself, landing an assistant office manager's position with a chain of upscale gourmet supermarkets. It was such a fashionable, trendy, upwardly mobile kind of job, such a gentrified position. Samantha had become what her parents' generation had called a yuppie. One never heard anything about yuppies anymore. They still existed, but culture had moved on and fixated on other demographic phenomena. Millennials were the big thing today, but a young urban professional was what Samantha had worked hard to be, and she was doing well at it until the kind of business predators that had also emerged in those yuppie days had their way. Once they were through with the Metro Foods market chain, Samantha's journey through yuppiedom was done, and her plans pulled over to the shoulder of the road. One minute she was on the road to go anywhere, the next she had no idea where she was going or how she would get there. Samantha blubbered again. What were her options now? She liked this apartment. It had a spacious living room, a cozy and serviceable kitchen, a bathroom that had been remodeled before she'd moved in, and an equally spacious bedroom. It was a great starter place. So many evenings she had come home from work, made herself a cup of tea, and settled down to relax and watch television on her sofa, and while relaxing she would glance over at the non-working fireplace and imagine the working one that she would have in her next apartment or her house after working for a while and getting herself a promotion. Samantha even entertained the idea of installing one more thing in this place. a boyfriend. A handsome, ambitious boyfriend. Someone with a nice smile and a nicer body, who would very comfortably fill the queen-sized bed in the bedroom with her. Wouldn't that be the perfect reward for all of a girl's hard work? As well as she'd worked on her life, Samantha had worked on herself. The 24-year-old body in her cotton shirt, jeans, and denim jacket was slim and nicely curved, thanks to the gym membership that she expected she might soon have to cancel along with the cable TV if she didn't work something out before too long. She had let go of looking for a relationship in the time she had spent establishing herself in what she had assumed would be the beginnings of a career. But the fact was that Samantha was a healthy young woman and had needs beyond those of a job and a cash flow. She'd had no intention of staying single or continuing to sleep alone. She'd had boyfriends in school, boys of her type, jocks with the kind of body she liked, who knew their way around a girl's body and were as good lying down as they were on the field and the court. She had fully expected to start shopping around for a suitable guy until the news came about the corporate maneuvers in which ownership of the Metro Foods chain changed hands. And the layoffs began. God, the layoffs. It had hurt her to see the staff of associates and clerks on the sales floor decimated when the layoffs hit. It had broken her heart to see them leave with prospects even dimmer than what her own had now become. She had thought that at least the back offices would be spared, that at least she and her bosses and office mates would be safe from the economic mayhem going on out in the store as the workers filed out and the machines came in. Then came the layoff notice with her name on it, and Samantha Vance was the next member of the Metro Foods family to be shown the door. And what was her life now? Something not as certain as she had expected it to be. Something much more tenuous and unpredictable, into which she was not ready to bring a boyfriend. If she were to have a relationship, Samantha resolved, she would have it as someone who knew where she was standing and knew where she was going. That, of course, meant finding a place to stand and figuring out in which direction to go next. Samantha knew what was in store for her. The writing and rewriting of a resume, the hours spent going through job listings online, the cover letters, the emails and phone calls going back and forth, the interviews, God, that whole process of interviews, the insufferable questions, tell us about yourself, for which she would need an elevator speech prepared. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? For which she would need something to say that would make her sound properly bright and motivated. And the questions she would have to ask them, the right questions that made it sound as if she were really interested and really wanted to make the prospective new employer's business the be-all and end-all of her life. Yes, the interview process, which would call upon her to become an actress and convince someone that she was ready and willing to turn over her life to the service of some new corporate entity. And in the time between now and whenever her command performances for job interviewers paid off, what was she to do? In school, Samantha had worked temporary jobs through agencies for which she had gone through the process of screening for skills, and then the clients of the temp agencies still wanted to put her through an interview process. Maddeningly, the clients hired a temp agency to find them screened, tested, and qualified workers for jobs that were understood not to be permanent positions, and still they wanted to interview people rather than trust the agency's judgment, having screened and tested all their people and just work with whom they were sent. There was just no escape from any of it. Samantha had thought she could just stay settled in where she was for a good long stretch and spend some time building her skills and her reputation before having to face again any of what awaited her now. So she had thought. But life had mocked her expectations. "Screw you, life," she muttered to her reflection in the mirror. Then, remembering her groceries, she went to collect the bag from the sofa and take it to the kitchen. All the while, she clutched that unemployment check for dear life. After dinner, Samantha settled down on her bed with her MacBook and brought up the internet, and there she began to go through job placement listings. She needed to set herself up with some interviews soon, if for no other reason than to be able to show the unemployment office that she was actively looking for another position to keep the checks coming. She was educated. She was smart. She was personable. She was experienced. She was aggravated. Nothing was jumping out at her. Samantha was seriously considering another option: civil service work. Both of her parents had worked in state agencies. They had remained in positions from which only a charge of high explosives could blast them out. Bland, ordinary, humdrum, run-of-the-mill jobs that at least had the virtue of being backed by unions and hard to be fired from unless you were a total incompetent and an absolute screw-up. They had kept a roof over the family's head and paid for a few extras. They had afforded Samantha a good education. but they represented a life of slogging and plodding through a bureaucracy, which Samantha found neither challenging, exciting, nor terribly interesting. They paid well and they offered great benefits, but they were otherwise in every way undistinguished jobs. Samantha had prepared herself for more than that. Would she really have to go the way of her parents? Really? Perhaps, Samantha thought, she was looking in the wrong places. Perhaps she ought to try thinking a bit less conventionally. If the regular job listings and the state postings were not moving and motivating her, what else might there be? On some impulse or whim, she brought up the website of the local alternative newspaper. It was a long shot, but perhaps, finding the link to the paper's classified section, she decided just to have a look. She found the jobs section and began to scroll her way through one item after another for which she was unsuited, or was obviously a scam that the paper should have vetted more carefully, or that sounded suspiciously like a multi-level pyramid scheme or a door-to-door sales job, or was otherwise wholly unappealing. After several long and thoroughly disheartening minutes of perusing the regular text advertisements, Samantha was ready to move on to some of the job boards in hopes that something there might be at least a little less demoralizing. That was when she advanced from the text postings to the display postings, and something on that page jumped out at her. Samantha actually squinted at the peculiar display ad, scrutinizing it closely to make certain she was reading it correctly. A bemused look came over her face at what the bold lettering said. Werebear needs heir. Wealthy ursine metamorph needs to have a cub to retain his inheritance. Seeking attractive, intelligent, educated, professional female under 30 to serve as surrogate mother. Ursines and humans only. $75,000 fee for successful IVF. Stipend paid until fertilization accomplished. The ad continued with contact information for email responses and a request for a headshot to accompany all emails. The rich, shape-changing male who posted the ad wanted to see in advance what he was getting in a prospective mother for his cub. He had standards, and with his kind of money, he was in a position not to settle for less than the best. Amazed at what she had just read, Samantha looked up, bewildered, from the screen of her laptop. Was this person, whoever he was, serious? Was this wealthy man who was sometimes a bear, or this wealthy bear who was sometimes a man, really looking to secure his place in his Ursine dynasty by hiring some female, possibly human, to have her eggs combined with his bearish seed and carry his cub? Why go to such lengths, such measures? Why would he not just find himself a suitable wife of whichever species and start a family? She could imagine a number of reasons. A normal courtship would take time, perhaps time that the prospective Papa Bear did not have, though that begged the question of why he hadn't planned ahead. And then there was the distinct possibility of not falling in love with the object of his courtship, or falling out of love after marriage and having issues with custody of the cub and perhaps a very costly divorce settlement. Even if Mama Bear were to have signed a prenup, it could still set him back. It was all a very pragmatic idea, really. Not a terribly romantic idea, to be sure. Hire a woman, pay for the in vitro procedures, pay for all of her prenatal care and the delivery, pay her for the use of her body as a living incubator, collect the cub and his inheritance. It was all neat, clean, and tidy that way. All that, of course, was leaving aside the possibility that he was simply gay and wanted to become a father without bothering himself with heterosexual sex that would turn his stomach. Hiring a woman to be his surrogate would be an eminently practical alternative in that case. Summing up the whole idea in one sentence in her head actually made her burst into laughter out loud for a moment, sitting there on her bed with her MacBook in her lap. This well-to-do werebear, whoever he may be, was looking for a womb for rent. The outrageous pun almost made Samantha keel over laughing. She had heard of women selling their eggs to fertility centers. And she had heard of women in conditions of financial distress actually renting their wombs. There was the pun again, threatening her with another peal of laughter to fertility-challenged people desperate to have children. But she had never, ever imagined being in such a position herself, carrying a child to hand over to the sperm source in exchange for money. Samantha was not one to judge, but it all sounded so grotesque. Was that the word she wanted? Grotesque? Samantha tried to put herself in the position of a woman who would agree to such a thing. What would it do to that woman's life? The first thing that crossed her mind was the other people in her life and what they might think. That brought her to her parents. Samantha loved her mother and her father. They had been loving parents. They had been kind to her and given her every advantage and every good thing in life that was within their means to give. But they were ordinary, conventional, even provincial people. They were not hard-headed conservatives by any means, but they were thoroughly mainstream, old-school, button-down sorts. A thing like this was just out of bounds to people like them. She could well imagine their reaction, especially her mother's, to their daughter renting out her body. She could hear her mother in particular bringing up that there was a word for women who did such things. It was not at all a pleasant word to say or to hear. Of course, that would not be what Samantha was really doing. She would not be actually letting the wealthy Werbear have sex with her. She would be going to a professional medical facility where an OBGYN staff would perform a procedure, or likely a series of them, to make her the expectant mother of the bear man's cub. She and the bear man would never see each other naked, never even touch except to shake hands. It would be nothing at all like the kind of transaction that would make her parents so aghast. Never seeing him naked, never letting him have sex with her. Samantha pondered that part of the arrangement. While she was certainly not chaste, she had never experienced anyone like a Werbear or any kind of metamorph in bed. In school, some of the boys who took her to bed were of other races. She'd had a Latino boyfriend for a while, and a lover of mixed races, black and white. But a man who was two species in one, that would be something new. What she knew of sleeping with morphs she knew only from things she had read, things she had seen on TV and in magazines and online, and things she had heard other women say. Metamorph men, Ursines included, were uniquely gifted. The genetic mutations that enabled them to change into other creatures also somehow seemed to make them unusually handsome and physically beautiful. Samantha had never heard of a male morph who was homely or balding or fat or too thin. Some human males, no doubt envying them or feeling threatened by them or even desiring them, found them disgustingly gorgeous. Many human females found them the ideal partners, not only because of their inhuman handsomeness and the athletic perfection of their bodies, but because once they were busy in bed, they were relentless. A male metamorph's ability to achieve, maintain, and use an erection, and to recover and fuck again and again, was known to be on the average twice that of a human male. If the chance to go to bed with a morph ever came her way, Samantha had thought more than once, she would take it, and him, and see for herself what every human woman who'd ever lain with one had claimed. That, however, was not the situation in store for whatever woman the wealthy bear man might choose from the ones who answered this ad. This would be an entirely clinical thing with no sex, no bonding, no emotional attachments to complicate matters. It would be a job. Just a job. Samantha took the MacBook from her lap and set it down beside her on the bed. She scratched her fingers through her hair, shook her head, and groaned loudly, incredulous at herself for the places she had just let her mind go. The very thought of getting pregnant with a wealthy shapeshifter's baby for money was the single most outlandish, outrageous, just plain out there idea that had ever crossed her mind in the 24 years of her life. Pregnancy for pay, of all things. It was bizarre, crazy, weird, wacko, lucrative. She looked over at her screen again, and there was the figure. $75,000. $750,000. It might not make a girl set for life, but it could set her up very well for quite a long time. With that kind of money, she might even do what she had heard of some of the rich girls she knew in college doing. Save and invest the principal, live on the interest, and all she would have to do would be to get pregnant and have his cub. He would even pay her a stipend, so the ad said, on which she could probably live comfortably while waiting for one of the procedures to produce the desired result. She could keep this apartment that she liked. She could keep her car. She could pay off the credit card, which would no doubt bump up her credit rating. The student loans would cease to be a problem. As outlandish as it was, the idea was not without its practical side. There was really only the strangeness of it all, and what she would tell her parents and everyone else. Would this crazy, outlandish thing actually be worth pursuing? It was entirely possible that he wouldn't even choose her. There could very well be someone else that he would like better, someone that he thought was prettier, smarter, better educated, in better shape. Someone of his own kind who met all of his qualifications, even. There was no reason to assume Mr. Grizzlybucks would even select Samantha Vance to carry his cub. Samantha frowned at the turn that her thoughts had just taken. Something that her father liked to say came echoing through her mind. Expecting failure is not the way to succeed. But did she want to succeed? Was this thing something she really wanted? Were the effects of this thing on her life something for which she was really prepared? She bent her knees up and wrapped her arms around them, sitting in what amounted to an upright fetal position, how ironic there on her bed, and weighed her options. Was she prepared for the employment checks not keeping up with the dwindling of her bank account? Was she prepared for the months it might take to find a new job that might not be as good as the one from which she'd been downsized? Or for the prospect of drifting through temporary positions? Was she prepared to be in arrears with the bills, with the rent? Was she prepared to ask Mom and Dad if she could come home? If she was not ready to be the surrogate mother of this rich bear man, what was she ready to do? What's it gonna be, Sammy? Frowning harder, she unclenched her knees and lifted the MacBook back into her lap. I can't believe I'm doing this, she thought as her fingers hit the keyboard. She was actually about to write a cover letter to introduce herself as a candidate for a job getting pregnant. Pregnant? For God's sake. Was she out of her flipping mind? Yes, she was crazy with worry and anxiety and, she had to admit, fear. Crazy that for all her education and skills and experience, she was about to face one of the worst nightmares that can possibly take over a person's life. Crazy that she had better do something sooner than later, or it would all snowball on her. She was facing the insanity of a modern world that made everything about money. Not what you had to offer as a person, but what kind of tool you made for someone else and what you had in your purse and your bank. What kind of cover letter could she write for a thing like this? In the standard form, one introduced oneself, mentioned the job in question, matched one's skills and experience with the requirements of the position, encouraged the reader to look at one's resume, and finished with the all-important call to action, the request for an interview. There were subtleties and nuances, of course. There was the matter of addressing the thing to someone. People always liked these things to have a personal touch, which sometimes meant doing some digging around, sometimes making phone calls to find the party in question. To whom it may concern was not considered good enough. Finding the name of the right party was thought to show that one cared. The idea amused Samantha, a human resources director or personnel manager in charge of finding the right candidate to get pregnant for the big boss. She switched from her word processor back to the web page to find a name. The boss bear himself would certainly not put his own name on the thing. He would have someone else to be the gatekeeper, standing at the entrance to the cave, so to speak. Samantha realized that for any other job she should learn more about the company and what it did. Well, this time was not applying to a company so much as she was applying to an individual. She was not going to be an employee of a business or a corporation. It was actually more of a freelance, contractor type of position. With a company, one could do some research and prepare oneself better, come up with some questions to ask in the interview. Oh yes, they loved that idea. Interviewing the interviewer. Asking things to show that one had bothered to find out things about the company and taken an interest in something besides the damn paycheck. The company, more than likely, saw the ideal employee as a tool who should have no mind or will or life of his own outside of the job. But the applicant was expected to be interested in and enthusiastic about the company. To be considered at all for a job, one had to look as if one would live it and breathe it and care about it beyond the salary and the benefits, to make the job one's life and one's reason for living. Even temporary jobs had become that way. We're paying you to live for us. In this position, Samantha would not be living for the company. She would be giving her living body to a new life created for the employer. And she would not know anything about who the employer was or what he did or what he stood for until she showed up for the interview. This should rightfully have made her hesitate and think twice about the whole thing. To her surprise, once she found the contact name in the ad, she switched back to the word processor and started typing again. So what were her qualifications for this job? She was young, female, healthy, intelligent, educated, very pretty, and had a working uterus. There were the usual buzzwords and selling points. She was a go-getter, a self-starter, attentive to detail, and so on and so on. How should she adapt the standard employment pitch to a position like this? I'm ready, willing, and able to go get myself knocked up with a metamorph cub. I will be attentive to all the details of the in vitro procedure and carrying the baby. I will be prompt in getting to the delivery room at the hospital and put in overtime in labor. I will deliver a healthy shapeshifter baby on deadline. Samantha could not help but think that there must be something out there, something that was saner, more reasonable, than what she could hardly believe she was now attempting to do. There had to be something, and there very likely was if she could find it. But whatever it may be, it would not pay $750,000. Huffing incredulously at herself, she kept typing. She said she was a highly motivated and goal-oriented individual. $75,000 made for a most desirable goal and excellent motivation, though she did not put it that way. She described herself as an honest, caring, hard-working person who came from a good family and had good friends. She mentioned that she was healthy, that she did not smoke, that she had a good diet and never used illicit drugs, that she liked to swim for exercise when she went to the gym. She told her potential Papa Bear that she would take as good care of his unborn cub as she took care of herself. Perhaps all that, plus her photos, would at least be enough to get her through the door for an interview. That, and her description of her education and work background, would have to be enough. She would attach her formal resume with the letter and the photos, and all of that would have to get her the nod. Now, about those pictures. Still not entirely sure of what she was doing or all the implications of it, Samantha was not the sort of girl to put less than her very best effort into anything she set out to do. With her accustomed attitude, she put the MacBook to sleep, climbed off the bed, and took herself to the bathroom for a shower and a shampoo. After blow-drying and brushing out her fall of golden hair and donning her best blouse, skirt, and shoes, yes, even the shoes, they lent themselves to her attitude. She took the computer to her desk, went into the photo booth app, and took some pictures of herself. Next, she broke out her selfie stick, attached it to her iPhone, and photographed herself standing up. With all the pictures collated onto her computer, she put them into a zip file and attached them and a copy of her resume to her cover letter, and prepared to zap them off to the email address provided in the ad. For a moment that felt as if she were dangling over a precipice, as if she were at the crest of a roller coaster or at the edge of the drop of a waterfall, Samantha sat at her desk and hovered her finger over the enter key of her MacBook. She did not really have to go through with this. The job market was never static, with new opportunities arising every day for whoever was willing to take the time and effort to root them out. Tomorrow was another day, another chance to root and dig through the internet and find something else, something not so off the wall and outrageous as renting out her womb. However, something else would not pay $75,000 and a stipend. Holding her breath, Samantha hit the enter key. She could practically feel the electrons leaping through her computer and out into the web, carrying her bundle of information and images to wherever it was going and whomever would receive it there. At first, her breath froze as if that energy had leapt right through her. There was a tingling, dizzying moment of thinking, did I just do that? Did I just seriously actually do that? Her email told her, message sent. Yes, she actually did it. Leaning back into her chair, she gave a long, huffing exhale. Yes, she had actually done it. And what if she had? Whatever employee of Mr. Grizzly Buck's who was in charge of all this would receive what she had sent, and would decide whether to call her in or pass her by. And she would hear back from them with either a yeah or a nay. If it were a nay, then fine. It would mean she would miss out on the experience of a sexless, clinical pregnancy with the cub of a metamorph, and a potential $75,000 plus a stipend. Groaning, Samantha hauled herself up from her chair and took herself back to her closet to take off what she was wearing and slip into the customary t-shirt and shorts that she liked to wear to bed. She would call it a night and sleep off whatever crazy impulse this was that had led her even to consider such a ridiculous thing. Getting pregnant with a rich werbear, indeed. The two massive, hair-covered bodies slammed hard against each other in the spacious room with matted floors and mirrored walls. The muscles of the two mighty frames collided so hard that the very room around them seemed to shake with the impact. The mouths gaped widely, showing the huge spikes of their teeth, and the sounds of predatory roaring and grunting reverberated through the space. Reared up on their hind legs, pressing against each other, the colossal black bears pressed and grappled at each other, exerting their huge ursine muscles but withholding the snap of their deadly fangs and the slash of their claws that could have instantly disemboweled a human. Bellowing and roaring, they pushed their huge, fur-coated frames together, each one straining to topple the other and gain dominance. At last, one bear prevailed. With a last fearsome, bone-rattling roar, He heaved himself against his opponent and toppled him. The other bear crashed onto his side on the floor mats, and the one who thus brought him down came down on top of him, pinning him there and letting loose another furious bellow. The pinned bear roared back, not as loudly, with a rasping, throaty sound, and a snorting noise, a sound of concession. He lay unmoving beneath the bear who'd pinned him, and for a moment they stayed that way, heaving and grunting, until the victory of the bear on top was firmly established. Only then did the victorious bear climb off of the one he had downed. He loped a few steps away across the floor mats and let the other one bring himself up on all fours again. The two bears faced each other, nodding their huge ursine heads, and grew calm. And then they changed. The huge, hirsute bodies transformed, losing their fur and taking on smooth human flesh. The limbs and torsos and heads turned from those of bears to those of muscular, naked men. They stood up naturally on two legs in the space where they had stood on four. The one who'd lost nodded deferentially to his sparring partner, who nodded back, acknowledging. The losing bear was now a very handsome, smooth-bodied, well-muscled man with dark, tousled hair and a sizable, uncircumcised penis. He said to the winner, "Good match today, Ken, like always." "Like always, Reese," agreed Ken Brecker, rubbing casually at the bicep of one arm. "You're harder to beat every time." The naked Ken Brecker was a sight to behold, a tower of massive but not overbuilt and bulging muscle, with hair bristling across the broad, hard plateau of his chest and down the plates of his abs. His thick, dark hair crowned an intensely and magnetically handsome face with piercing, dark eyes, and was complemented by the shadow of stubbly hair covering his cheekbones, jawline, and upper lip. A patch of dark hair at his crotch sat above a formidably long and thick, uncut cock. Everything about Ken, his look and his manner, marked him as an alpha. In any forest, he would be the king. "Well, for you I have to stay tough," said Reese, his trainer. "Nothing less than my toughest for you." "I appreciate it," Ken said. "Next week, same time?" "You got it," said Reese, and turned and walked to the side of the training room where he had left his clothes. With a satisfied breath, Ken strode over to the mirrored wall by which he had left his own gym shorts upon transforming for his sparring match with Reese. He slipped them on, checking out his body in the mirror, confident as always of being in shape. Being a werbear had its advantages. He was more naturally given to a well-muscled frame than a human male, but male ursines who didn't pay proper attention to their form could start to become round and stout with age. Just on the other side of 30 years old, Ken was not yet at the point where that would become a concern, but the time would come. He had made up his mind long ago that if he were to go soft and round it would not be until he was an old bear, and he would fight it with all his strength every step of the way. The girth of age would not have him without a truly epic battle. As a matter of pride, Ken wanted to keep himself in his best shape for what he liked to do best, which required a different kind of partner than the one with whom he had just been sparring. After a shower, Ken put on a suit and took the elevator down from his penthouse, which housed the private gym where he'd been working out, to the executive office level of his building, and the outer office of his business suite sat short-haired, brunette Pamela, as always, tidying her desk to go home at the end of the day. Lifting her glasses from the bridge of her nose back to her eyes, Pamela acknowledged her boss. "Mr. Brecker, I've just finished collating those emails from the ad that you placed in the Central Square Weekly. I forwarded them to you a few minutes ago." "Thank you, Pamela. You might as well take off now. I won't need you while I'm going through those." Rising from behind her desk, Pamela smiled at him and stepped out to cross the room to where she'd hung her coat. "I'll see you in the morning." In spite of their professional relationship, Ken idly wondered what Pamela thought of what he was doing. The two of them knew only the generalities of each other's personal lives, for the most part. But for his latest undertaking, he had necessarily had to let her in on something private, which she of course would not share with anyone outside of this suite where they worked. She needed to understand exactly what it was that she was doing for him, receiving and collating emails from applicants not for a job, but for a wholly different and most unusual kind of position. She had never voiced an opinion about it and had never made any sort of suggestion of judgment about it. Still, in some corner of his mind, Ken had to wonder what his human receptionist thought of his search for a female, human or ursine, to carry and give birth to his cub. Did she think the whole thing was cold, sterile, and unromantic? Did she find it inhuman? He had to admit it did not seem like the most human thing in the world. But then again, it was not particularly ursine either. It was, however, the way Ken preferred things. His hard work and dedication to his family business had earned him the position of CEO of Brecker American, and as such he was an independently wealthy werebear from his salary alone. That was a matter of pride. But the family fortune was his heritage, and he would not be cut out of it for want of producing an heir. Ken had no desire to take a wife. He never lacked for females to enjoy in bed, but the ties of matrimony, just one female as a partner for life, were outside of his interests. He was prepared to be a bachelor father and looked forward to the experience of raising and loving a cub. He had thought long and hard about the whole thing and found an unexpected space opening up in his heart for a little man-bear. He hoped for a boy to care for and play with, to teach, to guide, and to love. He was sure he could give a cub not just his obligation to blood and money, but the love that only a father could give. He simply saw no need of taking one mate for life to do it. Ken had always been interested only in mounting females, not marrying one. He saw no reason for anything else, not even fatherhood. Which is where the emails that Pamela had received and gathered up for him came in. Stepping from the reception area to his spacious inner office, which was furnished as much like a luxury apartment as like a workspace, Ken made his way to his desk and his computer. He would conduct the search for a mother for his cub with the same businesslike efficiency as he did everything else. Well, almost anything else. When acquainting himself with a female and taking her to bed, he could afford to be playful. In fact, the casual sex he enjoyed required a casual approach. But for this endeavor, for which he would take the woman only to a fertility center and not to bed, he would keep things on a business level. He would treat her kindly, respectfully. He would be mindful that she was a person, not just an incubator, and be attentive to the needs of a prospective and later expectant mother. He would show her the appreciation that she deserved for the admittedly monumental thing he was expecting her to do for him. But there would be no attachment and no sex, and none of the complications that those things would bring. On that score he was clear. Sex was for other females, not for the one that he hoped to find in this collection of resumes and photos. Seating himself at his desk and turning on his computer, Ken located the files that Pamela forwarded him and began methodically to open them and pore through them. He found the expected assortment of candidates. Some were prettier than others, which was a distraction. There were some that made him think, motherhood and his family fortune be damned. He simply wanted to peel the clothes from them and himself, lay them down, move into them, and conduct the kind of transaction that he most enjoyed. These candidates he wanted to set aside to offer them a position between the sheets, but he dismissed the idea as less than ethical. It was a pity, though, for there were a few faces in these files that Ken would very much have liked to see in person, under him moaning, "Don't stop, don't stop." Nevertheless, it brought up the point that whoever it was that would carry his cub, she would have to be up to his usual standards. She would need to be someone that he would actually want to fuck, and someone that he would actually want to marry if he were in the market for a wife. The mere fact that he was not going to sleep with or marry the mother of his cub did not mean he wanted just any female. She was going to help him produce an heir to the Brecker empire. Only the best female he could find for the job would be suitable. So, there were some pretty ones who made Ken's dick threaten to take over the selection process. He fidgeted in his comfy leather chair, resisting the strain of his erection, making himself concentrate on other matters, difficult as it was to ignore his man-bear libido. And there were some especially well-educated ones, even some PhDs and some doctoral candidates, and some with a business background. And he had not been specific about race, so he found among the human and ursine females a few who were black and Hispanic. Ken was indifferent to the matter of ethnicity. Circulating in the metamorph world, he had grown up with werewolves and werdragons and werfelines. The differences in human skin and hair were negligible compared with differences in form, and he had slept with a few females of different races. It hardly seemed to matter. There was every possibility that the one he was looking for would not be in this set of candidates. There would be any number of others in the time that the ad that he placed was in circulation. If he didn't find her now, he would find her eventually. The next folder on the list was named Samantha Vance. Ken clicked on it and let its contents display themselves. Okay, Ms. Vance, let's find out about you now. To give his dick a rest, he decided to look first at her resume. He skimmed to her most recent employment and felt something happen in his mind like that of the tires of his Chevy Corvette screeching loudly to a sudden, hard stop. He locked his eyes on the place where this Samantha Vance had last worked. Metro Foods, assistant office manager. Oh shit, Ken realized she used to work for the people that we just bought out. He gulped at the thought of it, for he realized what must have brought Samantha Vance to apply to carry his cub. The urgent and perhaps even desperate need to replace the lost income of being laid off when Brecker American acquired Metro Foods and replaced 3/4 of its workforce with self-checkout kiosks. In all likelihood, Ms. Vance was a victim of his family's downsizing its new business. Ken almost fell back against the back of his seat. This he was not expecting. As a member of a billionaire business family, he had been part of his share of acquisitions, buyouts, mergers, corporate raids, and business breakups and sell-offs. He, of course, paid attention to the news and was aware of things that were going on in the country. He knew about individuals, families, sometimes even whole communities adversely affected by the decisions of people like him and his family. And like all business people, he had chalked it all up to being just business. The intent was never to do harm. It was only to make and maximize profits. There was nothing personal or malicious about it. Creasing his lips, Ken closed Samantha's resume and opened the zip file of her pictures. He felt craven and shallow as he heard himself think, God damn it, don't let her be one of the beautiful ones. The photos that opened up in his preview app dashed his hopes. The 24-year-old blonde who had been hit by his layoffs was a vision. Had he met her in person, Ken would not have wanted to lay her off, but lay on her. All night. Damn, he cursed to himself. Now, the impersonal decisions of business and their consequences suddenly had a face. And it was sheer loveliness. And Ken heard himself ask in his head, what the hell have we done to this girl? He stared at the face on his computer, shook his head and exhaled, and made a decision. Samantha Vance. You're getting an interview. If you want more paranormal romances like this, please, my love, be sure to subscribe to the Romancely YouTube channel. I look forward to spending more time with you. Subscribe and let's make it happen.
Chapter 2. Bereft of a job to get her out of bed, Samantha had fallen into a habit of sleeping late, which she knew she should break, since looking for a job was a job in and of itself. Nevertheless, she was still in bed when she heard her phone's ringtone and reached half-heartedly over to the nightstand to pick it up. Blinking and squinting, she focused her sleepy eyes on the phone's identification and shot upright when she recognized the name, Pamela Harrison. Pamela Harrison. The contact woman from the Where Bear Needs Air ad. She was calling. She was actually answering. The ringtone carried on, and Samantha, feeling self-conscious sitting up in bed in just her night clothes in spite of no one being able to see her, had to steady her breath before hitting the screen to answer. She also had to steady her voice to say, hello? The woman's voice came from the other end, hello, good morning. Samantha Vance? Still resisting the tremble in her voice, Samantha responded, yes, this is Samantha. Good, said the woman. My name is Pamela Harrison with Brecker American. I'm calling in response to your resume for the ad in the Central Square Weekly. Now Samantha could not stop the tremble. The ad about needing an heir. Yes, that's the one. We'd like to have you come in for an interview. A sudden realization squeezed at Samantha's brain. There was another name that she recognized. Her brow furrowed so hard, she thought her forehead would split open. Her mouth opened again, but this time no sound came out. The name reverberated in her mind. Brecker American. Her eyes widened as the realization squeezed harder. Brecker American. The woman's voice on the other end shook her back to attention. Hello? Ms. Vance, hello? Are you still there? Shaking her head hard, forcing herself to concentrate, Samantha gathered what wits she had and answered, yes, I'm sorry. Yes, I'm still here. Would you like to come in for an interview, today if possible? Again, Samantha's voice failed her. She was still dizzy with disbelief. The woman calling her was with Brecker American, the company that had bought out Metro Foods. The company that had automated her store and laid her off and put her in this mess to begin with. The man or metamorph seeking a female to have his cub was the very one who had tossed her life in the dumpster. She had applied for a position as the hired uterus of the one who was the reason she was in trouble. The universe had one hell of a sense of humor. If fate itself were sitting in front of her right now, she swore she would slap it dead in the face. And again came the woman's voice. Ms. Vance, are you there? Would you like to come in for an interview today? Shaking her head again, Samantha scrambled for an answer and could not believe it when she actually heard herself say, yes. Yes, I think I can make it today. She stared out into space with bulging eyes, knowing how terrible she must look at this moment. Oh my God, am I actually doing this? Good, said Pamela. Let's see what time we can set up with you. And in another couple of minutes it was done. Samantha was scheduled for an appointment with Mr. Kenneth Brecker, the CEO of Brecker American, who had taken a wrecking ball to her life and would now be interviewing her for the privilege of having a doctor send his sperm into her womb to create his bearish offspring. She ended the call and dropped the phone into her lap, going from dizzy to numb. Not even beginning to know what she should feel, she completely shut herself off. In a few hours she was going to be sitting in the office of this man, this billionaire who regularly morphed his body into that of a hulking mass of fur, fangs, and claws, who would ask her Lord only knew what kind of questions about her suitability to be his baby bear mama. And this was the very man, the very being, whose thoughts of nothing but maximizing his own profits and making his bottom line as black as his fur had put her out of work and in need. What would she say to him? Would she even be able to face him? And more, what would he say to her? He would certainly have looked at her resume. He would surely know where she was previously employed. And thus he would know that he, Kenneth Brecker, at least had a hand in her predicament, if he were not personally responsible for it himself. She lifted up the phone again, thinking she should call this Pamela Harrison back and cancel this whole thing. Samantha did not want to have this interview. She did not want to have this conversation. She did not want to have to look this man in the face, however excruciatingly handsome it might be, considering what kind of creature he was, and have to confront him about the upheaval that he had invited into her life with his business decisions that made no account of how, and on whose backs, businesses were built. In all this city, there had to be somewhere else Samantha could go, some other corporate entity that she could approach, to restore her livelihood. She was not yet so desperate, so needy, so wretched, that she was prepared to take herself into the den of the bear who had already mauled her, figuratively speaking, before she ever had the chance to face him. Samantha held up the phone and hovered her finger over the command to display recent calls. She only needed to hit that one number, get that Pamela woman back on the line, and tell her, and by extension, the bear who employed her, to forget the whole thing. Just one touch and she would at least be connected to Pamela Harrison's voicemail. That was all it would take. And for some reason she could not make herself do it. Why? Why could she not make a simple phone call and cancel an appointment that her every instinct told her that she should not have accepted? Why? Was it really that she wanted the $75,000 and the stipend so much? Or was it that she wanted to hear this Kenneth Brecker make an accounting for himself, for why he had done this to her life and the lives of so many other people she knew? Was it that she wanted to look the Ursine billionaire in the eye and tell him what she thought of him? If nothing else, that would blow the whole interview, wouldn't it, and spare her the experience of being pregnant with, and giving birth to, a baby that would be only half human. That was reason enough to go through with it, wasn't it? Or was it really the money? Samantha honestly did not know. But instead of calling Pamela Harrison back, she found herself putting the phone back on the nightstand, climbing out of bed, and heading for the shower while planning her outfit for her trip to the business district this afternoon. Feeling very much like a soldier suiting up for battle, Samantha donned her off-white silk pullover blouse and her black linen mid-length skirt, and her shoes with just exactly the right amount of heel, and accessorized herself with just one thin gold necklace that her parents gave her for her 16th birthday. She checked the golden fall of her hair one more time to make sure that it was perfect, stashed her phone in her purse where she'd also put a folded copy of her resume in an envelope in case she needed to refer to it in the application process, slung the purse over her shoulder, and strode purposefully out of the door, still not knowing what to expect from the two-bodied hunk that she was about to meet, nor what she would say to him. For any other interview a girl could prepare. For this one she would have to wing it. Once she was behind the wheel of her car and on the road, other ramifications of what she was about to attempt to do, assuming she was the one that Brecker chose out of the multitude he would be seeing, started to turn over in Samantha's mind, things that she had begun to ponder over breakfast. There really was more to it than just the money. It was really going to be so much more than just a contract position. Being pregnant, actually pregnant, would be so much more than just a job. Pregnancy affected everything in and about a woman's life. If she were to be the selected candidate, having that Werber cub inside her for 9 months, or however many months they gestated, she wasn't sure that was one thing she should ask, would take over and be the context for every hour of every day. The sinking feeling in her stomach that she got from this realization reminded her of one of the first consequences she would have to face. When she talked to her mother about the experience of being pregnant, the first thing her mother told her was that morning sickness was a misnomer. It was not confined to those hours between dawn and 12 o'clock. There were days when her mother had hugged the toilet at 3 p.m. Her mother had in fact run down quite a catalog of ill effects of having the proverbial bun in the oven. Want to feel like you've worked a whole week plus overtime in one day, sweetheart? Wait till you're expecting. How charming was that? Oh, and then there were the mood swings. If one ever wanted to know what it was like to be bipolar, her mother said, pregnancy would show her. Samantha had the distinct feeling that being pregnant with the cub of a Werber would make her feel as if she were not so much a bear as the wolf man. And all of that, all those delightful things that were enough to make a woman wish she had never come within a mile of anyone's sperm cells, was not even counting the experience of actually giving birth. She had once heard a character on television compare labor to trying to pass a watermelon out of the wrong side of one's body. The idea of it chilled her to the bone and made her want to pull over to the curb, shuddering, and hug herself. Everyone always said giving birth was the most wonderful thing in the world. How could anything that was supposed to be so wonderful sound so utterly horrifying? Samantha questioned whether the $75,000 plus the stipend was not selling herself cheap in light of what she might be facing, assuming she turned out to be the one that Brecker wanted. Perhaps she should turn the car around, call Pamela, and cancel the whole thing after all. Nevertheless, she kept heading for the business district. Brecker American was located near the top of a tall building that the corporation itself owned. There was a bank branch and one of those pricey coffee houses in the lobby. The Brecker offices occupied 3 floors beneath the top 2 stories. Samantha suspected those top 2 stories were a penthouse. It fit the profile of the person she was about to meet. If anyone would live in a luxurious spread atop a skyscraper, it would be this Kenneth Brecker person. Samantha was frankly surprised that he did not keep his home at ground level, in a vault somewhere, like a cave. It struck her as the sort of thing that a man who was also a bear would do. Standing in the lobby and hitting the elevator button to go up, Samantha made a slightly wincing expression at that last thought. Oh, Sammy, that's not too prejudiced, is it? She wondered what the equivalent term for racist was when talking about a metamorph. The elevator doors parted at the 23rd floor and Samantha stepped off in front of a big marble wall with what looked like letters of onyx adhering to it, spelling out the company name Brecker American. She was here. Under the name of the company were signs pointing in different directions. To the left was executive, to the right, administrative. Samantha headed left. At the end of the hall to the left was a big glass wall with a brass-framed door in it. Behind the wall and door was a waiting room with 3 women that Samantha took to be in their early 20s to mid-30s. After a first glance at her competition, she went inside. In there with the other seated, waiting women was a small desk with a personable-looking young man behind it. Samantha went to the desk to check in. "Samantha Vance," she said. "I'm here for Ms. Harrison and Mr. Brecker." The young man tapped his pen on the sign-in book on the side of the desk opposite him. "Sign here and write the time," he said. "Ms. Harrison is in the inner office. She's Mr. Brecker's receptionist. You'll be called on when it's your turn." Samantha did as the outer receptionist said and found herself a seat among the other young women hopefuls. Looking them over, she could see that she was neither the oldest nor the youngest. But they were all quite the lovely-looking lot, she'd give them that. The advertisement had called for photos as well as resumes, after all, and Brecker had obviously had Pamela call in the ones he considered the most attractive. Seating herself, she tried to imagine what email the ones not chosen to be interviewed had received. "We're sorry, the billionaire Werbear is looking only for women he'd enjoy screwing for fun if he weren't trying to have a cub. We thank you for your resume and photos, but you're not up to his standards." Well, when one is terribly wealthy after all, one of the things one could most afford is high standards. Samantha supposed she should be flattered that Brecker thought she measured up. He was choosing his potential mothers to be the way they used to hire waitresses at the old Playboy clubs that she remembered from her media and popular culture elective class in college. She had the very distinct impression that the man she was now waiting to see in the inner office was a playbear. The whole thing just confirmed what she had thought before about his reasons for wanting to have his cub this way. He was looking for a woman who was up to his standards, who would be even more disposable than the ones he took to bed. Glancing discreetly around the room, Samantha wondered if any of these other women were not just women but ursine females. One could not usually tell who a metamorph was. There was usually no outward sign that a given person had 2 bodies. The other bear women might be any of them or none of them. She certainly wasn't about to ask for a show of hands. It was their own business. She plucked her phone from her purse and decided to while away the time waiting for her appointment checking email and Facebook. And there was another thought. She had not told anyone, on the phone or online, and certainly not in person, what she was doing today. What if she were the one that Brecker picked? Was this something she would put out on social media? A thing like this, being the surrogate mother to a 2-bodied billionaire? Absolutely not. This was not the sort of thing that she wanted to put out to the public, even the people that she knew only virtually on the internet. The idea of it made her turn pale. She would have to tell close friends, and of course her parents and certain very close members of her family. That brought her back to thinking of the way her parents would react, especially her mother. The things her mother would probably say began to ring in her mind's ear again. And in the privacy of the space between her ears, Samantha said, "Shut up, Mom." It made her feel guilty to speak to her mother that way, even in her imagination. But she did not need to hear those things just now, even that way. She was about to come face to face with a bear in his cave in the sky. Over the next hour, a couple of women went into the inner office and came back out, and a couple of others entered and sat down. Samantha had shown up early because she thought there might be an application to fill out, and those things were always so damn time-consuming. The other women present had no doubt had the same idea. Then the young man at the little desk picked up his phone, put it down again, and called out across the room, "Samantha Vance. You're next." Rising, brushing a hand across her skirt, Samantha went to the door separating this outer reception area from the inner one. It was showtime and she was on. For the first time in all the years that he had been running the family enterprise, Ken Brecker was actually anxious about interviewing someone. It was a unique feeling. He had been as perfectly calm interviewing the other women as he'd been interviewing people for regular jobs, in spite of this being not a regular job he was trying to fill. But this one was going to be different. In just a few seconds, Samantha Vance was going to step into his office. Samantha Vance, who had been laid off in his reorganization of Metro Foods. He felt a bit as if he were not the CEO of a corporation, but a president about to meet a refugee from a country that he had ordered his troops to bomb. What injuries had this young woman sustained? What damage had the infrastructure of her life taken? In the minutes ahead, he might just find out in no uncertain terms. He fixed his eyes on his office door and waited. At once, the door opened and Pamela ushered the young blonde inside. "Mr. Brecker," Pamela announced, "this is Ms. Samantha Vance." And here she was. The photos of her that she had attached with her resume and cover letter did not really capture this young woman's beauty. She must have taken them with her computer camera or her phone. The reality of Samantha was much lovelier than her pictures. "Hello, Mr. Brecker," she greeted him. He stood up behind his desk and offered her his hand. In a different circumstance he would offer her a great deal more than that, but this was not that kind of meeting. She stepped forward while Pamela withdrew back to her own station. Smiling softly, Samantha accepted his handshake and his own smile. "Good afternoon, Ms. Vance." "Please have a seat," said Ken. Samantha sat down in one of the very comfortable chairs facing Ken's desk and studied Ken as he sat himself down again as well. So here he was, the corporate predator whose other body was that of a predator of the forest. Here was the roaring, mauling beast in man's clothing, who had put her in the position of fearing for her apartment and her car and just about everything else in her life. If he were in his other body, for what he had done to her, Samantha would not have minded seeing him stood up on a pedestal, stuffed. Or his head mounted on one of the walls of this office that looked like an apartment in Architectural Digest. Or his hide stretched out as a rug on the floor. But in this body, in his human form, this Kenneth Brecker was a man to end all men. Fully dressed, he had to be the most gorgeous thing she had ever seen in her life. If he were naked. Lord, if this man were naked, she'd be inclined to strip, lie down on one of the sofas in this place, and offer herself up to him. "Come on, big bear, and do to the rest of me what you've done to my life." But this was not the time and the place, and he was certainly not the person for that. "Focus, Sammy. Focus." "How are you doing today?" asked Ken. Her unspoken answer was, "Living on unemployment insurance and hoping I'm set up again before it runs out." Aloud, she replied, "I'm fine, thank you." "That's good to know," said Ken. "I see in your resume that you majored in economics. Do you see yourself in a business someday?" "Right now I hope to see myself continuing to eat and stay alive, no thanks to you. I had really wanted to get myself established in a good career with good advancement potential for the long term. I thought that's where I was until you came along, sir. But from your major I assume you at least had your eye on the business world or the marketing profession," Ken said. "Where would you like to see yourself down the line, say in 5 years?" "I'd like to see myself working steadily someplace, in some job, where I could use the things I learned in school and get myself promoted, maybe to someplace like the side of that desk where you're sitting right now, you corporate rating, carpet-bagging son of a bear. But you've kind of put up a roadblock to that one, haven't you?" More tactfully, she responded, "I'm still interested in business. I'd still like a corporate position. Not administrative, managerial, or executive. I've got background and skills. I'd like to put them to the best use." Ken took that in very thoughtfully, tucking in a back pocket of his mind the idea that if they were sitting in the cafe in the lobby, or any of several bars that he knew, he would be looking forward to trying out Samantha's skills in areas that were not taught in economics classes. But for the time being, he continued, "You're interested in the role from my ad in the Central Square. What is it that attracted you to being a surrogate?" This was exactly the kind of interview question that Samantha had always hated. Why in the hell did he think she was interested in being a surrogate? Why was anyone ever interested in any kind of job, whether a traditional one or even something like this? She wanted to earn herself a bloody living. What else? This was in fact the thing she most hated about job interviews in general, this need to put on a damned horse and pony show for people, to make a great show of what it was about the job that you supposedly thought was the most fascinating and wonderful thing in the world and why you were the one perfect person on the face of the earth to do it. Face it, what motivates anyone to go out for any job is the desire for a paycheck and benefits and the ability to live a decent frickin' life. But no, part of the song and dance of any job interview was always meant to show the interviewer how one's own motives stood out from those of everyone else who came through the door, even though every applicant's motives were identical to those of every other. This was something that someone like this Kenneth Brecker would never understand. Damn him. Nevertheless, Samantha pieced together an answer. "I can do this. I'm young, I'm very healthy, I eat well," and she mentally inserted, "for the time being, anyway, and I take great care of myself. I have a gym membership and I swim every other day." Again she mentally inserted, "and I'll keep swimming every other day as long as I have my gym membership, and if I lose it I'll use my alumni privileges at school, so there. I'm ready to learn how to be a good expectant mother. I'll learn everything about carrying a baby human or your kind. I'll take the vitamins, get the right amount of rest, see the doctor like clockwork, go to Lamaze. I don't smoke. I don't use drugs. I won't drink. I'll do everything possible to see to it that your cub comes into the world safe and healthy. I'll be a good pregnant mother and see to it that you get to be a good father." It was the way she said it all that impressed Ken. She didn't actually say anything that he hadn't heard from a dozen women today already. With some variations, he could practically recite the whole routine by heart. And he expected it would be this way. But there was something about the way she gave the same answer that he had heard so many times. There was a particular fire in her convictions, a particular force in the way she held her eyes on him as she spoke them. In truth, Ken knew that Samantha, like all the others, wanted and needed the money, that she probably needed it very badly. And in Samantha's case, he had a personal knowledge of the reason why she needed it. The look in her eyes told him what she wasn't saying. He could see the accusation and the recrimination there. Her eyes answered him as her lips did not. "I want this because of what you did to me. I'll have your cub, but in return I expect you to pick me up after pulling the rug out from under me. You broke my life. Now I expect you to help me fix it." At this moment there was, so to speak, an invisible bear standing in the room with them, and neither of them was mentioning it. They could ignore it, but they could not deny it. And Ken actually doubted whether he wanted to deny it. The question was how to bring it up. It had to be delicately if it were to be done at all, so that was the way Ken proceeded. "Ms. Van Stup, there's something I'd like to ask, and I'm not sure how I should go about it, or if I should even mention it." Samantha's entire body tensed at that, and she only hoped her face and her body language were not showing it. She suddenly had a cold, prickly perspiration down her back. He wasn't actually going to put that out here, was he? Not that. Ken continued, "I'm going to preface this by saying you are perfectly free not to answer this question. You can ask to move on to something else if you want. And if you do answer, I want you to feel free to be as honest as you like. I promise I will not hold your honesty against you. It's all right to speak your mind. I'm a businessman, and in business sometimes you have to learn to have a thick skin about some things. So you can answer honestly. Now this made Samantha feel very much like a bear loping unsuspectingly through the forest, about to plant her foot in a cruel, nasty steel trap that would slam shut with its metal teeth and dig them into her flesh and muscles and make her roar in agony. In learning about how to interview for a job, she had made a special note of the way interviews were sometimes booby-trapped. They would give a personal questionnaire and encourage the applicant to answer all questions honestly. Or they would ask a question and say it was all right to be honest and candid. Or they wouldn't even do that much. The most commonly loaded booby-trap question was, "Tell me what you consider your strengths and weaknesses." Samantha was especially wary of that one because it was something that they asked to make people sabotage themselves. Weaknesses indeed. What they were looking for, she knew, was ammunition. They might say they wouldn't hold it against the applicant, but what they wanted was something to hold against them. They wanted a reason to deny a person a chance at a livelihood, a reason not to give them what they needed. And they had cunning methods of getting it right from the applicant themselves. All right, then, Samantha decided. She would go into this with her eyes open. She would play chicken with the bear. With practiced calm, she asked, "What would you like to ask?" Ken took a breath, a measured beat. Then, in a tone just as measured, he put the question to her. "Ms. Vance, are you mad at me?" And there it was, just as she suspected. The very question she was anticipating and dreading. The very steel trap set before her, waiting for her to put down her foot. The next few minutes would decide it all. But still, she was careful. "I beg your pardon?" "Are you mad at me?" he repeated. "We both know why I'm asking that. I know where you worked in your last job, and I think you're aware that I know. And we both know what happened, why you're not there anymore. You know where you are right now, and you know who I am. And what I did. I admit, it was my decision to automate Metro Foods. And the order to downsize that came from me. You and I wouldn't be speaking right now if not for that. So what I'd like to ask, Ms. Vance, and what you're free to answer honestly if you want, is," and he took just the slightest beat for emphasis, "are you mad at me?" Samantha did not answer him at first. She did not even look at him at first. She looked away instead, out into the luxuriously furnished office from which he had made the decisions that had thrown her life into such uncertainty, such fear and anxiety. She must right now be sitting in the very place where those decisions were made. What had put her in such jeopardy must have happened right across the very desk in front of her. This was fate's sense of humor. She looked back at him and said, "Mr. Brecker, I don't think anyone is ever happy to lose a job unless they hated the job. And I didn't hate working for Metro Foods. I didn't hate where I was. I didn't hate the work or the people. I looked forward to being there for a long time, and I looked forward to moving ahead, having more responsibility, being promoted. I'm sorry that will never get to happen. I wanted that, and I'm sorry I'll have to look for it somewhere else. You did what you did because you thought it would save the company money, because a machine is just something you buy one time, and you put it there and install it, and you maybe have to call maintenance for it once in a while. But you don't have to pay it a salary every week, and you don't have to give it health and dental and breaks and vacation time. And you get to give your shareholders a bigger dividend, and that's really what people like you care about the most anyway, isn't it?" She could feel the cold perspiration on her back turning to a heat all over her body. Only the shareholders count. The people who work for you are just tools, and you don't have to care what a tool needs or if it can feed itself or take care of its family or go to the doctor. And if a tool isn't convenient for you, you can just throw it away. And it's not personal. It's never personal. Your relationship with a tool, it's never personal and it doesn't matter. So am I mad at you? Mr. Brecker, a tool isn't mad when the one using it decides he doesn't need it anymore and throws it away. A tool doesn't care, just like the user doesn't care. She realized she had started to lean forward at him and raise her voice, and she stopped herself. With a hard, huffing exhale, Samantha sat back in her seat again. She stared across the table at him, waiting for whatever he'd say next and not actually caring what he said now. He had asked the question and she had given him the honesty that he asked for. And she was certain now that she had blown the whole thing. Fine. Let the damned bear man find some other woman to sire his precious cub. Samantha Vance had given him back some of his own and she was not sorry. She would go back to the apartment that she did not know how she would pay for, she would take her unemployment money, and she would forget this good-for-nothing bear and do her job hunting somewhere else in the forest. Ken took in everything that she had just said, and he multiplied those feelings by so many other employees at Metro Foods and so many other places that he had bought and automated, or broken up and sold off, turning out the people who worked there. And he knew that Samantha had probably just spoken right to his face for every single one of them. It was something that a person in his position hardly ever had to face. Someone like Ken was too big, too important, too wealthy to care about someone like Samantha Vance. And he felt the sting of her words as a bear would feel the sting of bees into whose hive he had poked his hungry snout. A silence descended upon the room like the silence in the forest when a feared predator is passing through and all the other animals scurry up a tree, into the bushes, under a log, anywhere that they get away and hide until the dread creature is gone. When Ken spoke at last, Samantha was surprised at what he said. "I understand," he told her. He watched Samantha, who sat otherwise motionless, arch her brows and blink her eyes at that restrained reaction, to be sure. "You must be wondering how it is I can possibly say that," Ken said. "How could someone like me, in my position, possibly understand someone like you in yours, right? And you're right about that much. I admit I don't have any frame of reference for what's happened to you, what you're going through. And I admit I never will. It's a whole world that I'll never know. That's not what I mean when I say I understand. I know you've heard the expression, we're in business to make money. And that's true. For someone like me, the profit motive is the only motive. Everything else comes second if it comes at all. That's another thing I admit. It's how I was raised. It's what I was always taught. We Breckers are a business family. That's how business thinks. And when you're in a position like ours, you don't see the effects your decisions have on other people. You hear about them, but you get to brush them off. Or it just can't get through your fur, you might say. So how the things you do affect other people, it's all I guess abstract is the word. It's never anything solid, it's all abstract. But having you come here, and be brave enough and angry enough to say these things right to my face. This has put a face on something, and it's given a voice to something that I never had a face or a voice for. Because of you, this isn't an abstract thing for me now. It's a real thing. That's why I say I understand. That's probably not enough for you, Ms. Vance. But I do. Of all the things that Kenneth Brecker could have said to her, this was the thing Samantha had expected the least. Where was his insult? Where was his indignation? Where was his outrage? Why was he not asking her how she dared to come into his office like some spoiled, stuck-up little upstart and speak to him that way? Why was he not telling her to mind her place? He could have at least given her a frown, a tisk-tisk, a little superior mockery and condescending and patronizing for the middle-class girl who had no idea what she was talking about. But she was getting none of that. Instead, he actually presumed to tell her that he understood and sound as if he meant it. What the hell kind of rich, overprivileged, fat cat bear was Kenneth Brecker, anyway? Before Samantha could figure out what to say, Ken continued. I should tell you something about myself, Ms. Vance. My family. I come from a family of old bears who are used to doing things in old ways. We started out as a family business. You're right, we do have shareholders, and the biggest ones sit on our board of directors. But we keep controlling interest in the company. The company does what my family wants it to do, and I act for the family. And what my family wants from me is to make sure that the Brecker fortune has new blood to pass on to. That's what they expect from me, an heir. Now I could refuse to bring another cub into the world just because my family tells me to. That would mean stepping down as CEO and leaving the family business and letting one of my younger brothers or my younger sister take over. I could do that. I'd still be a very rich man when I left. But I guess in my own way I'm as stubborn and proud as my family. I want what I was born into, all of it. I want not only what I've worked for, but my share of the legacy that I belong to. And I decided I didn't want to go to the length of taking a mate to do it. All I'm looking for is to give my family what they want, pure and simple, and there's no rule that says I have to do it the conventional, traditional way. And that's why we're talking now. Hearing this put an entirely new spin on the situation for Samantha. This Kenneth Brecker seemed to have unexpected layers to him. He appeared to be a more complicated man or creature than she thought he was. Simply, calmly, Samantha replied, I see. Your world and my world are two very different places, said Ken. Your problems and my problems are two very different kinds of things. But no one gets through life without having demands put on them. The demands put on me aren't the same kinds of demands put on you, I get that. But everyone expects something of someone else. And when I become a father, that'll be a whole other set of demands. I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to something, expecting things of me that will be very different from anything that anyone has wanted before. That's what a child or a cub is. It's a whole other world of needs. And I believe it's something where you can get back more than what you put in. With business, it's investment and profit. That's the world I've always lived in, profit and loss, or profits and dividends. Fatherhood, that will be a different kind of investment with a different kind of return. And I'm looking forward to it. Ken studied Samantha for her reaction to that. She actually began to shift a bit in her seat now, to make a curious gesture with her lips. If he had to name her expression, he would have called it confusion, or at least perplexity. Is there something else you'd like to ask? He said. Moving her eyes back to him, Samantha replied, I don't know how to ask this. I don't even know if I should. It's not really my business. We're still being honest, said Ken. And I think, with the honesty you've given me, and how brave you were to give it, you deserve to ask something a little personal. Please, it's okay to ask. What is it? She shrugged a bit at first, finding no other way to ask than directly. It's just not a man or a person like you. Why don't you want a wife? Or a mate? Why do you want to raise a cub by yourself? That's fair, said Ken. And you're not the first one to ask. As a matter of fact, they've all asked me that. And it's all right. I'll tell you, Ms. Vance. The reason I don't want to marry the one who'll be the mother of my cub is, frankly, that I've always lived a certain way and enjoyed it. Being a father will change everything for me. I'll have to restructure my whole life to be a father, to have a cub. To have a cub and a mate, I'd have to restructure even more. Like I said, I'm as stubborn as the bears that I come from. I'm willing to change if I have to. But I guess I'm not willing to change quite that much. He had put it very tactfully, but Samantha took his meaning from what he was not saying. what he was telling her but not expressly saying it was that he was an incredibly hot, fantastically sexy Ursine with a face and a body for which a girl should want to fall to her knees in worship and strip off her clothes to offer herself up, and he was accustomed to fucking whom he wanted, when he wanted, as much as he wanted, and he was not prepared to give that up. Not even for fatherhood. Well, being as rich as he was, Kenneth Brecker could live that way if he chose. That was what money actually bought, not happiness, but choices and options. Money bought the ability to make yourself happy. And Kenneth Brecker was accustomed to making himself happy with anything female that he saw fit, any time. "I see," she said again. "Is there anything else you'd like to know?" Ken asked. "I don't think there is." She realized she sounded uncertain, and she was. But she had learned that in an interview she needed to sound as if she knew what she were about and knew what she wanted. Indecisiveness was taboo. But in a matter of moments Kenneth Brecker had gone from being the shape-changing monster who threw her out of a job that she was good at because he didn't want to have to pay a lot of employees, to being a person with actual feelings such as they were and complexities. She had wondered before if she could carry the cup of someone that she resented. Now she asked herself if she could carry the cup of someone who was not at all who she thought he was. And she was damned if she knew the answer. But she at least had to appear that she knew. So she followed her first answer with, "No, I think everything's pretty clear." Even though it was not necessarily the case. "And I believe everything's clear on my end too," said Ken. "I think we have a basic understanding. I think that if I asked you to be the one to be the mother of my cub, what I'd get would be exactly the way you described yourself. I think his mother or her mother would be someone strong and confident and capable and committed and conscientious. And very, very smart. I think you'd be a good mother for any child, human or otherwise, whether as someone to raise a child or someone to be a surrogate. If I chose you, I'd do it knowing I'd done the right thing for my cub." Samantha found herself more moved than she ever expected to be to hear that. She felt almost as if some powerful, wild animal from the forest, some creature who in spite of his strength and power and ferocity knew better than to trust humans, had actually chosen to trust her. On some level, she actually felt honored that Kenneth Brecker would say that to her. Thank you," she half-stammered. "And thank you for coming to see me, and speaking so honestly," said Ken. He stood up and offered her his hand. She stood up and took the hand he offered. And this time it was different. The first time it was purely a business handshake. This time she actually felt the warmth, the strength, the pure sensuality in the grasp of what she still had to admit was the most breathtakingly beautiful man she had ever seen. This, in spite of the effect that he'd had on her life. "Ms. Harrison will be in touch when the decision's been made," he said. And he stepped around the desk to join her, and see her to the door. They walked quietly across the office and he opened the door for her. "Good afternoon, Ms. Vance," he said, letting her out. "Good afternoon, Mr. Brecker," Samantha said, stepping outside. Ken closed his office door and walked pensively back to his desk, with a curious and somewhat indescribable feeling. With the other candidates he'd seen today, he had simply let them see themselves out. Samantha Vance, however, he had actually walked her to the door. He was already back to his desk by the time he realized it. The beautiful blonde had made an impression, that was for certain. Ken sat himself back down behind his desk and touched his intercom to let Pamela know he was ready for the next one. He stared across the room at the door through which Samantha had passed. There would be several more today, but none of them would be like the one who had just left. Hardly noticing Pamela as the receptionist told her good afternoon and wished her to have a good rest of her day, Samantha made her way out of the inner reception area and was just as oblivious to the other people in the outer one. In a few steps she was back in the outer corridor and headed back to the elevator. She did not know what to make of the conversation she had just had in the CEO's suite. She supposed that she had just as much of a chance as any of the other candidates to be the one selected to be impregnated with a Brecker cub. What if she got the call? What if he asked her to be his mama bear for real? She could always tell him she'd had a change of heart and back out. It would be no fur off his hide. He would simply go to the first runner-up, who would likely jump at the chance. And that first runner-up would be the one to collect the stipend and the $75,000 and go through everything she would have to go through to bring the Brecker heir into the world. And Samantha's life, uncertain as it was right now, would go on. Walking slowly down the hall, pondering the whole thing, turning it over in her head again and again, Samantha just did not know. Odds were she should not even have to be concerned with any of this. The interview was over and done, and she probably didn't need to think about any of it ever again. But she just didn't know.
Hey there. Did you know that we've other hot romances like this that we want to release? But we need your help. Subscribing shows us that you're part of our journey and allows us to make more of these stories at a higher quality. So please, my queen, subscribe to the Romancely YouTube channel now. Thanks. Now back to your story. Chapter 3. Ken conducted the rest of his interviews that day, thanking each of the remaining women for her time, and cleared off his desk and turned off his computer. When Pamela called him on the intercom to tell him she was ready to go home and ask him if he needed anything else before she left, he told her no, thank you, and sent her home with a thanks and a good evening. And with his outer offices as empty as his inner suite, Ken sat in the big leather chair behind his desk, with his elbow on the arm of the chair and his stubbly chin in his hand, and pondered the thing for which he had cleared out all of his other business today. He had delegated every other bit of work to subordinates just to concentrate on his conversations with the women who sought to be the mother of his cub. The screening process to cull out the unsuitable ones and bring in only the best had yielded a number of eminently desirable women for the job, women that he would have wanted to take to bed if his aim were not to take them to a fertility center. Any of them would have served admirably, and he kept coming back to that one, that blonde, Samantha Vance, the one who'd sat in front of him and, in her tactful job interview way, raked his bare hide over her coals for the state of her life for which he was directly responsible. The one who had been personally affected by his business decisions. Samantha Vance had a fire about her. Perhaps it was a fire ignited by the indignation of being laid off from a job that she was good at, from which she expected to advance and build a career. But she was fiery, of that Ken had no doubt. She was proud, and he permitted himself just a faint trace of a smile at her being startled when he said he understood her position. She was beautiful when she was startled. She was beautiful when she was angry. Hell, she was beautiful. But that should not be the deal-maker here. He should weigh all the factors, the practical, pragmatic factors in favor of each of these females. And the practical considerations, then, should be his basis for deciding which one of them he chose. Huffing a bit, sounding almost like the bear that he was inside, Ken turned his computer on just long enough to forward all the candidates' files to his private, non-business email, to look at them on his home computer later in the evening. Then he picked himself up from behind his desk and exited the office, his destination the elevator upstairs to the penthouse. After dinner, Ken took a shower. His shower was like a great cave with granite walls and glass doors at the entrance. If those granite walls and glass doors could talk, they would tell of the women he'd had in here. They'd speak of the things he'd done to them.
Oh no, it's about to get hot.
But we can't put this on YouTube as they don't allow it.
I'm sorry.
But check the description of this video to join the Romance Audiobook Insiders and get details on how you can get the steamy scenes in future.
If you're already a member, the love scene references, Baby for the Bear, Chapter 3, Love Scene 1.
Okay, back to the story. Daring himself to utter the name, he whispered huskily, "Samantha." There. He'd said it. He'd spoken her name aloud. Well, audibly anyway. Not that anyone but Ken himself could hear. Allowing the face to hover in his mind's eye, he asked to himself, to her, to no one. "So then, is it going to be you? Are you the one?" Ken sighed. He could tell that his self-imposed 24-hour deadline was off the table. His mind and his prick had made the call. The offer of the job of bearing his cub would go to the one female of all the candidates that he could most imagine himself fucking. It was an impractical, irrational, unscientific, unbusinesslike decision. And perhaps that was the way it really ought to be. Cubs or human infants as a rule were not conceived deliberately, not with thought or planning or calculation. Even a planned pregnancy depended on passion and desire and the abandon of a male thrusting his hot and engorged prick inside a female. Perhaps it was only right and proper that Ken should hire the surrogate that he would most want under him in bed. And perhaps it was only fitting that the role should go to her, considering the words that had passed between her and him only hours ago. He pursed his lips, not as a frown but as a look of decision. Samantha it is, then. If she wants the job, it's hers. Now it was only a matter of telling her. When Samantha was this upset in the morning, only bacon with breakfast would do. Oh, to be sure, she had made her customary healthy breakfast. She had fresh strawberries, scrambled egg whites, toast, and orange juice all set out. But a plate of crispy bacon lay at the side, and it wasn't going to stay there for long. This morning Samantha had needs other than her health to satisfy. As soon as she got out of bed, the bacon was calling her name. Sitting down in the kitchen to eat, she pondered the emotional upset that had dogged her all night or, more aptly, stalked her like a bear and driven her to make this breakfast. She was upset with herself, even a little angry at herself. She was upset that she'd let herself be so upset with Kenneth Brecker. Well, damn it all, she thought, grabbing a piece of bacon and biting hard into it just to enjoy the crunch. She was upset and she had every reason to be. She had been completely blindsided by the discovery of just who it was that had advertised for a surrogate mother for his Werbear cub. She was taken completely unprepared by the prospect of having to go into the office of that Werbear, of all the shapeshifters in the world, to interview for the role of carrying his cub and bringing it into the world. And as professional as she'd wanted to be, tried to be, about it, the situation just completely got the better of her. She had sat in his office, across his desk, and actually told him off. She had not cussed him out, as she might have liked to have done if she had met him under any other circumstances, but she had certainly told him off. Clearly her feelings about it had changed since she left Brecker's office. Samantha now hadn't a doubt in her mind that she had utterly blown that interview, and the rational part of her told her that it shouldn't bother her. If anything, she should be relieved. This insane twist of irony was behind her now. She should not only be relieved, she should be grateful. She should thank fate for giving her the opportunity to face the man who had thrown her life into a tailspin and tell him what she thought of him. Yes, she should be relieved and she should be grateful. And yet, with her chomping teeth making short work of that piece of bacon and her fingers reaching for the next one, Samantha was upset with herself. She was likely to remain upset well past breakfast. It's gym day, she remembered. I may end up having to swim this whole thing off. She could see herself swimming more than her usual number of laps today. The phone ringing where she had left it on the counter behind her gave her something else to think about. Getting back up and going across to the spot beside the sink where the phone lay, Samantha pondered to herself, this is probably Mom calling to ask how the job hunt is going or if I need anything, her subtle way of feeling me out about whether I might want to move back home. No, Mom. I don't want to move back in with you and Dad. Yet, she reached the counter and picked up the phone and was glad, when she saw the ID on the screen, that she did not have that second piece of bacon in her mouth, for she would certainly have inhaled it and choked on it. This can't be happening. What does he want? Not a second interview. I can't go back there and face him again. No, as drop-dead screaming gorgeous as Kenneth Brecker was, Samantha could not face a second Q&A with him. Could she? To stop the ringtone if nothing else. She touched the screen to answer. Pamela's voice came through clearly. Good morning, Ms. Vance? Samantha put the phone on speaker and talked at it. Why yes, this is Samantha Vance. She thought she sounded like a robot. Ms. Vance, this is Pamela Harrison from Mr. Brecker's office at Brecker American. How are you this morning? Why all the niceties? Samantha wondered. Get on with it. What do you want? More politely, Samantha replied flatly, I'm good. That's good, said Pamela. Ms. Vance, I'm calling to let you know Mr. Brecker would like to speak to you again. Can I transfer you to him now? Time seemed to freeze for Samantha. Why on earth would his receptionist be asking to transfer her to him personally? If she were being turned down for the position, Pamela should just give her the news then and there, or email her even and not even bother with a call. But this? A phone call and a request to transfer her directly to Brecker? What could this be? It had to be a second interview. Yes, that was it. But no. He wouldn't ask for a second interview himself. He'd do it through Pamela. Samantha grimaced. My God. What is this? Can't be. Ms. Vance. Pamela's voice returned. Can I transfer you to Mr. Brecker now? Somehow Samantha managed to answer, yes. Hold one moment for Mr. Brecker, said Pamela. The line went silent while Samantha's heart did a jazz drum improvisation. Then came his voice. Ms. Vance? This is Ken Brecker. Samantha forced out the response. Good morning, Denimar. Brecker. How are you doing this morning? Ken asked. Again with the niceties. Damn the business world. I'm fine, she said almost faintly. Then she cleared her throat and spoke up. How can I help you? Ms. Vance, said Ken. I'm calling because I'd like to offer you the position of the surrogate if you'd still be interested. Time froze again, and this time-space seemed to implode around her, like the way Samantha had once heard it did around a black hole. She was at the center of collapsing space, folding in to crush her. Ms. Vance, said Ken. Excuse me? I said I'd like to offer you the position. Would you still be interested? Seriously? Really? Yes, really. I know it's sudden, but I thought a quick decision was in order, as not to leave people hanging. I hope you'd still be interested in being my surrogate. If you are, I'd like to have you come in again and start making arrangements to begin the in vitro procedures. And suddenly Samantha no longer recognized her own life. She mouthed the words, what have I done? What am I going to do? She then found the feeble response. You want me? Yes, Ms. Vance. I think you're the one. I hope you're still interested. I'd like to get things underway. Of course, yes. I'm sure you would. Does that mean you'd like to come in and fill out the paperwork and make the appointment with the fertility specialists? Samantha's heart was fluttering, and not in the way it ought to be fluttering when a fantastic-looking man was inviting her someplace. Then again, this was not the kind of invitation she'd ever dreamed of receiving from a fantastic-looking man. When she had that kind of fantasy, it was always about a man of Ken's type inviting her out for dinner and drinks and then inviting her to his bed. Today? I'm sorry, that's what you said. Today. I can free up the time right after lunch, Ken prompted her. Yes, of course you can. Samantha could hardly hear herself talking. Her voice in her own ears sounded as if she were far away. So, how about it? That was when the spike of panic drove itself through her. Breathing faster and feeling hot now, she blurted out, Mr. Brecker, I didn't expect you to be making a decision so soon. I don't think I'm exactly ready yet. That is oh my gosh. She forced herself to slow down, to speak more calmly, else she was likely to gush out something that she didn't mean. I'm sorry, it's just really sudden. Do billionaires always make decisions so fast? She winced at her own words while hearing him laugh a little on his end. What did that laughter mean? Was he genuinely amused? Was he mocking her? Was he laughing at the naivete of the girl just a couple of years out of college who had no idea of what the life of someone like him was like? Should she be angry? It really depends, Ms. Vance. I take the time that's appropriate for the situation. For this situation, I thought a fast decision was in order because of the effect it would have on the chosen candidate's life. If you're going to have to rearrange your life for a thing like this, it's better to know it sooner than later. Samantha bowed her head and rubbed her brow. The whole thing continued to feel like some bizarre dream, and it was one that she had invited with her desire for a quick fix to a dire problem, the problem that he had caused for her. Right? I see what you mean, she said. So, when would you like to come in? Ken asked. Okay, Sammy, it's now or never. With just one word, you can stop this whole crazy thing before it goes any further. You can stop this roller coaster before it goes off the rails. Just tell him no and he'll move on to the next woman, and she'll be the one to get the $75,000 and the stipend. Just put the brakes on this whole thing. with every intention of telling him no, thank you. I appreciate your consideration and I'm honored to be the one you want to carry your cub, but I've reconsidered and no, thank you, Samantha answered. Would it be all right, considering what a big decision this is? Would it be acceptable if I had a little time to think it over? And she shut her eyes and gritted her teeth, fully expecting him to call the whole thing off. But instead he asked, how much time do you need? At this point Samantha was sure, without having a mirror in the kitchen, that she was turning ghostly pale. Oh my God. He actually wants to let me think about it? She was ready to stammer out an answer, but she made her voice grow steady. No matter what kind of spot she felt herself in, she was not prepared to sit here stammering at a billionaire. Would a day be all right? 24 hours. Feeling herself on the edge of a cliff, she awaited his answer. 24 hours. I can do that. Call me back 24 hours from now. Use the number for Pamela's desk. I'll look forward to hearing from you. The tension drained out of Samantha's body. Her muscles relaxed. The hot and cold feelings running through her turned to normal. Her breathing became regular again. She had bought herself a reprieve of sorts. Thank you, Mr. Brecker. I'll be in touch. This time tomorrow. Very good, Ms. Vance. Until then. Goodbye. And they ended the call. Samantha put the phone back on the kitchen counter and stepped back to the table, sitting down in front of her unfinished bacon, the scrambled egg whites and toast and OJ that she had not yet even touched. She reached for another piece of bacon. That would be the first thing to go. Munching it, comforted by the taste of it, she was alone with the question repeating in her head. What am I going to do? In his office, Ken leaned back in his seat and contemplated the discussion he'd just had with the beautiful 24-year-old blonde. He'd said he wanted to offer her the position. Ordinarily, there were any number of positions that Ken would have in mind for someone like Samantha.
Hi there. Unfortunately, we've had to take this steamy scene out as it's against YouTube's terms of service.
If you don't want to miss out on love scenes in future stories, check the description and join the Romance Audiobook Insiders for more info.
If you're already a member, the love scene references Baby for the Bear, Chapter 3, Love Scene 2.
Okay, back to the story. Softly, he said, Come on, Samantha. Take the deal. Just take it.
Chapter 4. Thank goodness it was gym day. Working out at the pool had a way of helping Samantha focus her mind. She would swim, and she would swim, and she would swim some more. Pushing her body would free up her mind. Launching herself through water would launch her decision-making better. The clock was ticking. Pushing her body. That was the way she'd thought of it. If she accepted this offer, if she did this thing, it would push her body and her mind in ways they had never been pushed before. And then there would be the experience that she could not even comprehend, the experience of having to push Kenneth Brecker's baby out of her body. It amazed her that any woman under any circumstances was ever prepared for that. Nevertheless, after breakfast and a shower and a long brushing of her hair, she got herself dressed and out to the car and over to the gym. And once there she got herself to the locker room and into her one-piece swimsuit, and from there into the pool. Samantha's normal workout was 67 laps for half an hour. She did 70, then climbed from the water and stretched herself out on a deck chair. Watching others swim, she wondered how many of them, if any, were facing life-changing decisions such as the one that she was facing. Get real, Samantha. You are the only person in this place, maybe the only person in this whole city, who stands to make $750,000, plus generous living expenses, by having a rich werebear's cub. Everyone has decisions to make. No one else in here has a decision like this. The decision was not coming, and Samantha wondered exactly what was holding it up. Did she not need the money? Did she not want it? Of course she did. But was this really the best way, or the only way, to get it? What would it take just to pick up the phone, make a call, and say the words? Yes, Mr. Brecker, I will be the mother of your cub. But somehow it just wasn't happening. She knew she could. She knew she probably should. But she wasn't making herself do it yet. It wasn't tomorrow morning yet. She owed herself every possible minute to think about it. She went back to the pool and did 30 more laps for 15 minutes, then climbed out and headed for the showers. The rest of the day passed uneventfully. Samantha went home. She made herself lunch and ate it. She took a nap. It occurred to her that she could spend some of this day online, going through the job listings again. She had not looked at any postings since she made the appointment with Kenneth Brecker that had put her on the horns of this decision, and it made her feel a bit guilty to know that. Diligence in job hunting was expected of unemployed people. It occurred to her as well that she could call her mother and ask for advice. How could she possibly ask her mother for advice about a thing like this? How could she even bring up the subject? Her mother would no doubt find the whole thing bizarre and just plain crazy. "Hi, Mom, it's Samantha. Guess what? I've got a job offer. There's this Ursine billionaire who needs a woman to have his cub. He wants to take me to a fertility clinic and hook up my eggs and his sperm artificially. I'll carry his baby, which will be a little person who can turn himself or herself into a bear, and he'll pay me a small fortune for it. What do you think?" Sitting up on her bedspread, she shook her head, turning her hair into a cloud of gold that settled into an unruly mess when she stopped. Of all the lectures, all the admonitions, all the pronouncements of judgment that she had ever heard from her mother in 24 years, and Lord knows there were enough of them, she was sure that the reaction to her wanting to get pregnant with a werebear's baby for money would be the lecture to end all lectures, the judgment to end all judgments. And then there was her father. How shocked would he be? How incredulous? How disappointed? How just plain worried? No, bringing her parents into this at all, whether actually or in her imagination, was no good. Samantha resolved to leave them out of the loop, at least until the decision had been made, one way or another. If she decided yes, she would have to deal only with their reaction to her decision to go through with it, not with her coming to them with just the idea of it. All right, then. No Mom. No Dad. This matter was to be settled by herself. She was a big girl and it was her body. Actually, that would be the perfect thing to tell her parents. But she would tell them only if she were actually going to do it. Which she was not sure that she was. Was she? She made herself dinner and took it to the living room to eat in front of the television. She decided not to watch anything new or modern, only old television, old movies. Things made in the days before television talked about subjects like sex and pregnancy, when Hollywood pretended there was no such thing as sex and pregnancy happened between married people, often couples who slept in twin beds. That always struck her as funny. How did the couples in those old shows and films have kids? They must have rearranged the bedroom and pushed the beds together between scenes. It seemed an awful lot of trouble to go through for sex, which wasn't supposed to exist. Joking to herself about the whole thing made Samantha feel a bit better, and less anxious about the morning that soon would be just one night's sleep away. In bed that night, under the covers, in the dark after setting a morning alarm on her phone, Samantha's mind went for the first time to a place where it had not dared to go in all the time since she left Kenneth Brecker's office. Her imagination put him there, in her bedroom.
Oh no, another love scene had to be taken out due to YouTube's policies.
If you haven't already, join the Romance Audiobook Insiders to learn how to get love scenes in future.
Link to join is in the description. Pause this and do that.
It's okay, we'll wait.
Signed up?
Good, now back to the story.
P.S. If you're already a member, the love scene reference is Baby for the Bear, Chapter 4, Love Scene 3.
It was only Samantha, by herself, alone with the choice she had yet to make. For now she would sleep, and perhaps dream of him. Having allowed herself the waking fantasy of him, perhaps she would find him again in her sleeping dreams. Let sleep come now, she decided. On the other side of sleep would be her decision. Her phone woke her, not with a ring but with the alarm she'd set. Samantha got herself sitting up and took the phone from the nightstand. No calls had come in while she'd slept. Well, of course not, it was early yet. And she had said she would call him 24 hours from when they'd spoken last. The clock, so to speak, was still ticking. She leaned back against her pillow and tried to imagine what he was doing right now. Was he just getting up? Had he gotten up already? Had he slept naked? Samantha had heard somewhere that his kind loved to sleep naked. She formed an image of him climbing out of bed without a stitch of clothing, even as she had imagined him climbing into her bed before going to sleep last night. The image of him had rippling plates of muscle down his back, which made a spectacular show when he took a morning stretch, and two big, round, hard boulders of flesh for buttocks, which clenched and flexed hypnotically. And beneath his ass, two heroic pillars of thighs and two perfectly cut rocks of calves. Was this the way he actually looked in the morning? Her imagination of him ruffled his fingers through that dark hair and turned halfway around to burn his sexy gaze right into her with that stubbly handsome face that he never seemed in, as far as she was concerned, never needed to shave. He trained the look of his sexy bare libido right at her from her mind's eye, and from the way he was turned Samantha could get a side view of the prize beneath his pubes. It was a trophy of flesh, hardened with a morning erection, and the way Samantha's imagination of him looked at her with a crooked, lusty smile left no room for doubt of exactly what he wanted to do with it to her. Abruptly realizing where she had allowed her mind to wander first thing in the morning, and reminding herself that the place where she had gone was not meant to be relevant to the decision she was supposed to make, Samantha shook her head hard and cleared it of the deliciously carnal image that had taken over her first thoughts of the day. That could not be a factor, she told herself decisively. In the next few hours she would have to call him and tell him something. And whatever she told him must not be swayed or skewed by either this waking fantasy or the one that had preceded her into sleep. She put the phone back and tossed away the covers to get herself out of bed. Her decision must be predicated on her desire to stay in this apartment, to continue to feed herself, her wish to continue driving her car. Nothing more. Ruffling her hair the way Kenneth Brecker had ruffled his hair in her morning vision, Samantha made for the shower. The next few hours would be among the most important of her life. She would face them with a clear mind. Showered, dressed, and fed with a proper breakfast, Samantha still had a little bit of time left before she needed to call him with her yeah or nay. She sat with the phone in front of her at the kitchen table, expecting someone else to call, the way someone her mother, a friend from school, always seemed to call at the most inopportune time. If someone did, she would have to ignore it and let it go to voicemail. She couldn't speak to anyone else now, not until after she spoke to him. Samantha's heart beat hot and fast at the thought of the call she would soon have to make. The time of her last conversation with Kenneth Brecker was in her phone's records. It was the 23rd hour. What was he doing? Was he sitting in his office, doing some corporate executive thing, waiting for her to call? She should call him now and tell him whatever she needed to tell him, and have done with it. All she had to do was hit the screen at the record of that last conversation. She would thus connect with Pamela, who would connect her to him. She thought of writer friends that she knew in school and how they always seemed able to find some way to procrastinate before sitting down to write. One of them had told her once that writing was one of the most wonderful things in the world to do, once one was actually doing it, but it was also strangely one of the most difficult things in the world to start. It was as if it took a supreme act of will to make oneself do that wonderful thing, which had never made any sense to Samantha until now. It now seemed to be taking her a supreme act of will to make herself tap her phone and make one call. One call that could change her life completely, depending on what she said, for at least for the next 9 months, and very likely a good deal longer, considering the time it would probably take to conceive. That was the reason she hesitated, knowing that it would probably take some time before it happened, and knowing everything that would follow when it did. But then there was the money she would be earning just for periodic visits to a doctor's office, the best, easiest money she could possibly make. Some people, she knew, would question a girl's work ethic for a thing like this. Screw them, they don't have bills to pay. Setting her jaw, creasing her lips, and taking a hard breath, Samantha found herself hitting the number in the phone's record. Oh my God, I'm actually doing it. I'm actually calling. On the other end of the call came Pamela's voice. Brecker American, Mr. Brecker's office. Is this Ms. Vance? Samantha gulped, the fix was in. Why yes, it's me. May I speak to Mr. Brecker, please? Of course, Ms. Vance. Please hold. Well, here it was. Samantha licked her lips. Any second now, that voice that belonged to sex in a suit would meet her ears again and say, Ms. Vance? Good morning, this is Ken Brecker. Her heart jumped. There he was. She made herself speak up. This man was not someone with whom one hesitated. Good morning, Mr. Brecker. This is Samantha. She was actually trembling. Why hadn't she rehearsed something to say? She abruptly regretted her impulsive haste in making this call after wrestling with it for so long. She was going into this cold? What would she tell him? She hadn't even really, finally made the decision. Did she dare to tell him she needed more time? What if he told her he hadn't any more time? There would go the opportunity. And that realization lay at the back of what happened next. So, Ms. Vance, said Ken. I've been looking forward to hearing from you. I've been anxious to know what you decided. Are we going ahead? An unspoken I hope lurked in his question. Samantha braced herself to answer before she went ahead. I just wanted to call and tell you. The next words in her mind were, I appreciate the opportunity and your consideration, but I don't really think this is for me after all. The answer is no, thank you, Mr. Brecker. However, the next words out of her mouth were, yes, I'd like to go ahead with it. And a bolt of pure shock went through her the moment she put the words into the air. Samantha Vance, are you out of your freaking mind? Why did you tell him that? Now he's actually going to want to get you pregnant, you idiot. She could feel the smile in his voice and see him sitting upright in his fancy office chair as Ken responded, I was hoping you'd say that, Ms. Vance. That's excellent. That's wonderful. I'd like to have you come in right away and get all the paperwork done. We can be at the center by this time tomorrow. Samantha, trembling, thought but did not say, I'm surprised the center couldn't squeeze you in today, being a freaking billionaire and everything. They should have a doctor standing by with whatever kind of medicine dropper or turkey baster these people use. But her reply aloud was, of course I can make it in today. What time? Hold on just another second and I'll have you back with Pamela. This is excellent news, Ms. Vance. Is it all right if I call you Samantha now? The question made her heart turn a somersault and her mouth almost go dry. She gulped and replied, yes. Sure, you can call me Samantha. She was finding the moment positively surreal. Great. And I guess we're at the point now that you can start calling me Ken. I'll give you to Pamela now, hold on. Thank you, Ken. Samantha realized she had been sitting bolt upright through the whole brief conversation. At the realization that she just called him probably the sexiest billionaire on earth by his first name, she fell back against the back of the chair. His name rang in her head, Ken. Immediately she was talking to Pamela again, and Ken's assistant set everything up with the speed and efficiency one would expect of the assistant to a billionaire CEO. Quickly it was done and courteous goodbyes were said. And that was that. Feeling more like a robot than a person, Samantha ended the call and lowered the phone to the table. She had done it. She had actually done it. Agreed to let a fantastically wealthy werbear have her artificially inseminated with his cub. She had actually agreed to this thing that would make her, if not wealthy, at least comfortable at first, and eventually affluent. Why had she done this? Why had she told him that she would go through with this? Samantha searched her mind and her heart for the rationale behind this insane decision. There was, she realized, only one reason for it. And it was both the most foolish and most natural reason in the world. Getting pregnant with Ken Brecker would likely mean she would have to see him at regular intervals, or so she assumed. She assumed he would want to have regular contact with her, to get to know her as a person, to let her get to know him. She couldn't imagine he would want to make this a detached, impersonal process. He must want to make it something more than just a cold, business-like transaction, considering what she was undertaking to do for him. It would mean continuing to see him, to continue to be in the presence of this shape-changing embodiment of total sex. It was the stupidest reason in the world. And it was the only reason that made any sense. Well, there, she had done it. And now that she had done it, Samantha came to another amazing realization. She had no intention of backing out. She was going to go back down there again, to the tower that he owned, where he worked and lived. She was going to sit down with Ken Brecker in his office again. And she was going to fill out and sign the documents that would officially lease her body to him for however long it took. Surprised that her resolve was now greater than her trepidation, Samantha got up from the table to get ready for her appointment.
Chapter 5. With a final sweep of her pen on a final form, it was done. Samantha could tell how pleased and excited Ken was that she had accepted to be his surrogate. He had gone so far as to cater the filling out and signing of the necessary forms to proceed. When she arrived at his office suite, she found him waiting for her in the living room area with a gourmet lunch spread out on the table. Again they seated themselves on opposite sides, but this time it was to enjoy roast beef, steamed and broiled vegetables, sliced fresh fruits, warm bread, and sparkling cider. They dug in, and when Samantha tasted the roast beef, she recognized the recipe of the seasoning. "This is from Metro Foods, isn't it?" she asked. A bit sheepishly, Ken admitted, "Yes, it is, all of it. I thought it might be appropriate, but suddenly it occurs to me that it might be a reminder. I hope you're not offended." "No, you're right," she said. "There is something kind of symbolic about having a lunch catered by the place where I worked before. You know." "Yes, I know," Ken said. "I don't usually make faux pas like that. There are a dozen other places in the city that I could have called to cater this." "Do you own them too?" asked Samantha, a little more pointedly than she thought she should. "Oh, have I just blown this whole thing by asking that? Does he think I'm getting snarky with him?" To her relief, Ken responded only with a little chuckle. "No," he replied. "Metro Foods is the only business of that kind that we own here. There are other places that we either own or have an interest in." He trailed off for a bit. "It really was a bit thoughtless of me, but the whole thing just came together so well. The whole circumstance of how you came to answer the ad and everything, and the fact that we own Metro Foods, and my responsibility for your situation, and my being so excited that you were willing to be my surrogate. Considering." He paused, giving himself just a beat to admire the way Samantha's hair fell over her shoulders. She was just so beautiful. "This is a special thing for me, and I wanted it to be a special thing for you. And I wanted to show my appreciation for what you're doing for me. If you think I should have called someplace else, I apologize." Again, he was surprising her. He really wasn't at all the beast who had taken away her job and tossed her out. For a man who was also a bear, Ken was so human. And so beautiful. It was all Samantha could do to stop herself from staring at him. She felt as if she could just sit and look at him all afternoon, and imagine all the things she would want him to do to her, and she would want to do to him, if he were just a man that she was fortunate enough to meet. "You don't have to apologize," she said. "I really think there's something right about having food from Metro when we're just about to start this. It kind of I don't know means something, because you buying the company is what brought us together." Samantha stopped talking at that moment and looked down awkwardly at the deliciousness on her plate instead of over at the deliciousness on the other side of the table. It was her choice of words that was making her feel awkward now. Brought us together? Did she really have to put it that way? "I'm glad you think so," said Ken, and it was all he could do to stop himself from reaching across the table and lifting her face back up to look him in the eye again. That face should always be looking right at him with all that blonde loveliness. Something was stirring inside Ken, something besides the usual all-consuming arousal that he felt in the presence of females like Samantha. There was something about this female, of all females, being willing to do for him what Samantha had committed herself to doing. There was not a part of this room where Ken had not been naked with some female, on her back with her legs in the air, submitting to his impassioned humping and thrusting. He wasn't about to bring it up to her, in light of what their relationship would be, but Ken had so much more to offer this Samantha Vance than just the compensation specified in the contracts she would be signing after lunch. So much more. They finished lunch talking about other things. Ken tried to steer the conversation away from himself and take an interest in her. But Samantha's curiosity asserted himself, and she asked him things about where he'd gone to school, how he had come up in the family business, other things his family owned. It pleased him that she wanted to know more about him, as much he wanted to know more about her. For a while there was no more talk of Samantha's situation or her forthcoming experience with this scientific matchmaking of her eggs and his sperm or, eventually, as the expectant mother of his cub. All of that waited for the end of lunch, when Ken had a Brecker company intern come in and clear the table, and then he returned to his desk and produced the paperwork and a pen for Samantha. "I'll go over to my desk so I won't be sitting here, hovering, watching you fill these things out," said Ken, putting the documents and the pen on the table. "You can stay here and work on those, and if you have any questions I'll be right over there." Samantha picked up the pen, sizing up the task sitting in front of her. Legal forms, medical forms, a work contract, a form for the direct deposit of her stipend and eventual fee. She had her work cut out for her with them. "Okay," she softly said. "I'll just get started then." "Good," Ken said, stepping away, back towards where they had talked the first time. He settled down behind his desk and brought up some work on his computer, and resisted the temptation to watch Samantha from the corners of his eyes, an effort in which he was only partly successful. Over at the table, Samantha likewise made herself concentrate on the forms on the table and not the handsome, hunky form in the business suit on the other side of the suite. And with one last signature on one last piece of paper, she was finished. Putting down the pen, looking up and over at him, she called, "All done, Ken." There, she'd called him by his first name again. Calling him by his first name felt better than it had any business feeling. Ken. It was so short, so right to the point, so perfectly male. He was just such an absolute Ken. Smiling, he returned to the table and accepted the papers back from her. He leafed through them, his smile carrying on, and said, "It looks like everything is in order, Samantha. It looks like we're ready." And he moved his eyes from the documents to Samantha, sitting there looking up at him. He offered her his hand, and she took it and stood up. The strength she sensed in his hand, she knew, was only a hint of the strength that lurked in the muscles under that suit. "The appointment with the fertility center has been made for tomorrow," he told her. "With the forms in place, we have everything we need. All that's left is the procedure." "Right?" said Samantha. "The procedure. I guess you won't be needing me for anything else till tomorrow." Ken nodded. "Yes, that's all I'll be needing for now." It was then they both noticed Samantha's hand was still in his. Ken blinked at their clasped hands and let go. There were any number of other things he might need, but they were quite outside the scope of the agreement they'd just made. To divert their attention from the moment, Ken said, "I'll be sending someone to pick you up for our appointment in the morning. I'll call you and let you know when they're on their way." "You don't need to go to the trouble," said Samantha. "I can drive myself, no problem." "I insist," he told her. "For something as special and important as this, I want to make it special as it is. Be ready in the morning and I'll let you know when the car is there." The memory of her hand in his lingered as if it were still there. Something in his voice sounded like his touch. "All right," Samantha said. "I'll see you in the morning." He saw Samantha to the door to his suite, and there they paused with his hand on the handle. There were a number of things on which Samantha might like to have his hands on, but she certainly wasn't about to bring up any of that. "Bright and early," she said. "Bright and early." And Ken turned the handle to open the door to let her out. Once she was on the other side of the door and he pulled it shut, Ken sighed heavily and muttered, "Fuck, if I were any kind of bear at all, I'd have offered to tear up the damn contracts and do this the natural way." But the contracts were signed and the final deal was struck. As he'd said, what now remained was the procedure. The sterile, clinical procedure that he could accomplish much more pleasurably himself. Alas, what would now be, would be. Samantha was fully dressed and had finished breakfast the next morning when his call came. When she went to the living room to look out the window and down to the street, a gray limousine was waiting with a chauffeur standing outside. Startled, she pulled back from the window and felt the bulge of her eyes and the heat on her face. A limousine. He had actually sent a limousine, no. He was down there waiting for her in a limousine to take her to have her eggs collected. Oh my God. I'm going to the baby-making lab in style. Calming herself and self-consciously straightening her clothes, trying to imagine what the neighbors must be thinking, Samantha grabbed her purse from the coffee table and left the apartment. On her way downstairs, she thought that if Ken could have arranged to come for her in a horse-drawn carriage that used to be a pumpkin with a chauffeur who used to be a mouse, he would have done it. The whole thing was suddenly so bibbidi-bobbidi-boo. Outside, the chauffeur gave her a welcoming smile and led her around to the back door of the passenger's side of the car that seemed as long as a submarine, and helped her inside. There, sitting in a soft leather interior that could have come from half a pasture of cows, was Ken, dressed for business as usual, next to a tray with an open bottle of champagne chilling in ice. As Samantha sat down opposite him, they greeted each other, and Ken poured them each a bottle of champagne while the driver got underway. "It'll probably be a few weeks before your part of our little effort is ready," he said. "But once we've got everything completely in process, you'll be wanting to skip the alcohol, so you might as well enjoy some champagne this morning. Think of this as christening our voyage." She took her glass. Thank you. And they clinked together and drank. He was, of course, referring delicately to the 4 to 6 weeks it would take for the eggs that the doctor would take from her this morning to be ready to combine with his sperm. This man-bear to whom she had entrusted or contracted her future was being a complete gentleman about the whole thing. Samantha liked that. The woman physician at the fertility center sat Samantha and Ken down in her office and mapped out the whole process for them. They would not take her eggs right away, as Samantha's normal cycle would produce only 1 egg a month. First, they would administer and prescribe fertility drugs, which would begin with a shot in the lower abdomen. Samantha felt a little trepidation about that at first, as she had never liked getting shots as a little girl. But she reminded herself that she was not a little girl now and what she was doing was not a little girl kind of thing. The doctor also informed Samantha that while taking the medications she might experience cramps similar to those she might have from her period. Samantha appreciated knowing this in advance. Knowledge was preparation. It meant no surprises. During the cycle, as during the pregnancy itself, Samantha was to eat properly, which was no problem, except that it might mean having to cut back on bacon and drink plenty of fluids but no alcohol. And it simplified matters that she was already a non-smoker. The whole cycle would take over 2 weeks. Ken cringed inside, reminding himself of his personal promise to abstain from sex while trying to get Samantha pregnant this way. A couple of weeks after the first shot, Samantha would come in for a second. Then, about 3 days later, the doctor would determine the readiness of the eggs for harvesting. If everything was a go, a procedure to extract the mature eggs from Samantha would be done, and they and Ken's donation would go to the fertilization lab. In a little less than a day, the doctor would be able to determine whether they'd succeeded in producing embryos. If they had, the embryos would go into Samantha. At that point, they would hope for a pregnancy. Within about 2 weeks after successful completion of the cycle, They would know whether a little werbear cub was on the way. And then there was one other wrinkle to the whole thing, which unnerved both Samantha and Ken. It was something that they both knew about, but had overlooked in the midst of her need to keep herself financially solvent and his need to keep himself in the family fortune. With an IVF procedure, there was always the possibility of multiple embryos implanting, which meant a multiple birth. There was a chance that Samantha could find herself carrying not one werbear cub, but 2 or 3, and Ken becoming the father of twins or triplets. Was either of them really ready for this? Really? The physician was well accustomed to people having misgivings, second thoughts, even outright cold feet at this point. She advised Samantha and Ken to take a little more time and talk out this whole thing a little more, particularly in light of their not being a married couple. The fertility center even had a special room where a couple could just sit down and talk at the last minute about what it was they were planning to do or what they were having second thoughts at the last minute about and clear their minds for a final decision. Sitting across the desk from the fertility specialist, Ken and Samantha instinctively joined hands as if they actually were married. They exchanged a profound look filled with more feelings than they could name, and Samantha asked if that room were available right now. Something in Ken's heart sank at the question, but something in Samantha's voice told him the necessity of it. The fertility center called it simply the couple's room. It was a room where clients met to talk things over quietly before finally committing themselves to what the center would do for them. Most couples came out of this room firmly recommitted to going through with the procedure and embarking on the adventure of fertilization and pregnancy. Most of them. The room was designed and furnished for maximum comfort in the midst of the possible discomfort of the things people talked about in the time they spent there. It was all polished wood and brass, and plush chairs and sofas, with soothing paintings and murals on the walls and potted plants here and there. It was comfortable. It was warm. It was quiet. This was a place to think and talk, sometimes to cry. Samantha and Ken entered and shut the door behind them and sat down, this time not on opposite sides of a table, but on a cozy sofa. And Samantha began. "I knew all those things she was talking about, Ken," she said. "I looked them up for myself. This kind of thing, you want to go in with eyes wide open, so I went and looked it all up, and I knew." But what?" he asked. Sitting in that office, hearing it from her, it made it all real, I guess is the word. It went from being an idea or a decision to being a thing. An actual thing. "I know," said Ken. "I looked it up too. Or actually I had Pamela research it all for me. All the details, all the pros and cons. All the things she said. And you're right, doctors have a way of taking something that starts out as an idea and making it a thing. It's one thing to know it, and it's one thing to hear it," Samantha finished for him. "Are you afraid?" Ken asked. "I know there's nothing to be afraid of," she replied. It's just this whole process with shots and waiting and harvesting and implanting. Ken, I went into this because it was something I needed, and it's something I still need. I went into it because I was afraid. I didn't want to face that whole other process of what you have to go through just to get a damn job. I thought this was a way to get out of that. I was scared of being unemployed, of being broke, of everything that means, which is just frightening. I didn't want to face that. I wanted choices and I didn't want to be scared. But this is just this whole other thing, and she trailed off and looked away from him. Samantha had never felt as truly vulnerable in her life as she felt at this moment. Ken took her by the hand, and the warmth of his hand was like a warmth opening up inside her. She looked back at him, at the sincerity on the handsomest face she'd ever seen. "Samantha, there really is nothing to be afraid of. Nothing at all," he said. "If you hadn't come to me, you would have found something else. With your background and skills and experience, something else would have come your way. And it would have probably been better for you than working in the back office of a supermarket. You know what else? If you want another job, I can help you get one. Maybe even something at Brecker American. How ironic would that be, me getting you out of the mess that I put you in?" He smiled with the same warmth that he'd opened up in her. "There's absolutely something out there for a woman like you." He stopped short of saying a woman as beautiful as you, but that was what he meant. Could she tell that was what he meant? "But what about the agreement?" she asked. "All the papers are signed, the contract is signed, everything is set up. What about all that?" After all this trouble, would you just be willing to drop that now? What trouble? Contracts can be torn up as easily as they're signed. And you know I can find another surrogate. I can find someone else to carry my cub, and I can find another job for you. I can make all that happen. And you'd really want to? For me? He held her hand a little more tightly, as if to press his sincerity that much more strongly. Samantha, what you've been willing to do for me, it's so special. It means so much. For being willing to do this, I'd never let anything happen to you. Ever. You can believe that. Samantha was so moved, she could not answer in words. She only shook her head at him, understanding his meaning and the real feelings behind it. I really was willing to do it, she said. I know, he replied. He released her hand, much as they both wished he could go on holding it, perhaps forever. And together they sat in silence, until Ken found it in himself to say something else. Something that he was almost surprised that he dared to say. Of course, he said. There's still another alternative. What? She asked. If the whole IVF thing is what the problem is, and if you're still willing to go through with carrying my cub, we can bypass this thing completely. Samantha leaned back at him and drew in a little gasp of air at his obvious meaning. Ken? She said, unable to speak anything but his name. Are you? Do you? You don't really. As delicately, as gently, as he knew how, Ken said, I am. I do. And yes, really. And that idea doesn't have to go any further either. You can forget I brought it up. You can walk out on me right now. But we both know that possibility is there. For a moment, she was speechless, and Ken watched her struggle with her reaction. Then, suddenly not wanting to look at him again, Samantha said, But this was supposed to be. There was a way we were supposed to do this. It wasn't supposed to involve anything like that. But it could, Ken said. We could skip this place and do it that way. Naturally. But we have a contract for that, she said. So, we can tear up that contract and make a contract for this. I can still pay you the stipend and the $75,000. But it would be just us, no doctors. Now she did look back at him again, with a disbelief, an incredulity, a complete boggling of her mind that she had never experienced in her life. A contract for that? Would your lawyers actually make up a contract for that? With the retainer I pay them, Ken answered. My lawyers do whatever the hell I tell him, and he smiled a confident smile at her. Oh my God, was all Samantha could say. She was truly in another world, the world of billionaires and the power that they wielded. As incredulous as she was at Ken's proposal or his proposition, as the case may be, she had no doubt that he could make anything happen that he wanted to happen. Tell me something, said Ken. Are you attracted to me at all? Was he kidding? How could he ask her a thing like that, as if he didn't know the answer? He must know the answer. Ken. She began and couldn't finish. Ken said, This could be better, nicer, more satisfying, if you want to think of it that way, for both of us. Doing it naturally, we could make it better. And for the answer to the other side of my question, I felt attracted to you all along. You had me when you sat in my office and told me not in so many words to go to hell for taking away your job. She leaned over, put her elbows on her knees, and put her face in her hands. Oh, Ken, she blurted into her hands with her face hidden. Now he dared to move closer to her and put just one arm around her. Samantha, will you look at me? Please. Samantha did as he asked her, but she was now truly speechless. Let me ask you again. Are you attracted to me? And once again she could not answer in words, but with a shake of her head. Enough that you wouldn't mind going to bed with me? And there it was. He had actually put it into words. She shook her head yes again. He smiled tenderly at her. Samantha, he said, I want to go to bed with you. I want to make you pregnant. In bed. Have you ever been to bed with a morph? No, she admitted. I can tell you this, then. If you went to bed with me, I'd fuck you like no human male ever could, more than a human male could. A hell of a lot more. I'd make it the best time you could ever have, every time. And I wouldn't stop till you were carrying my cub. Hell, I wouldn't stop even then. Knowing you were pregnant with my cub would make me want to fuck you even more. And I'd do it as long as you were able to have me, and as long as it was safe for the cub. And you wouldn't have to worry about a thing. I take care of you, provide everything you needed. I know how this all probably sounds, like I'm offering to make you my kept woman or something. Maybe that's not the kind of relationship you want or not the kind of relationship you'd ever want, and I understand that. I guess you probably appreciate your independence more than that, and I respect that. But Samantha, even if you want to tear up the contract, and even if you don't want to have the kind of relationship we're talking about, I still want to go to bed with you. I still want to show you how beautiful I think you are. Can you maybe at least think about it? Ken, she said. That's an awful lot to think about. I know, said Ken. And since it looks like you're not going to be going back to the doctor for fertility shots and we're going to be tearing up the contract, maybe you'd like to think about it on the ride back to your apartment. Okay, she said. And together they left the couple's room to tell the doctor that they were putting the whole thing on hold, which was Ken's polite way of saying, I'll pay you for the appointment, but otherwise forget about it. The limousine ride back to Samantha's apartment was quiet. They drank no more champagne. Samantha sat at one end of the back seat, staring out the window, watching the city buildings roll on past. Ken sat at the other end, watching Samantha. When they reached her building, Ken insisted on getting out with her and walking her up to the door of her apartment. Samantha accepted, and up into the building they went. At her door, they stopped. I didn't bother you on the way back, he said, because I wanted you to have some time just to think. Do you need more time? I don't think so, said Samantha. Ken frowned slightly, not an angry frown but a softly disappointed one. A frown of acceptance. He shook his head and said, Okay, but will you at least call me if you need anything? And he turned around to head for the stairs. The sound of Samantha's voice made him stop and turn. Ken. Yes. I meant that I don't need any more time to think. Do you want to come in? Can you just send the driver on and come in? A smile blossomed amid the sexy stubble of Ken's face. I can totally do that, he replied. And taking his phone from his jacket pocket, he walked back to her door as she reached into her purse for her key. If you want more paranormal romances like this, please, my love, be sure to subscribe to the Romancely YouTube channel. I look forward to spending more time with you. Subscribe and let's make it happen.
Chapter 6. No sooner was Samantha's apartment door shut behind them than Ken had her in his arms for a kiss. It was a heart-stopping, almost faint-inducing kiss, a kiss of lips and tongue and desire that he had kept on a leash. Until now.
Oh no, it's about to get hot.
But we can't put this on YouTube as they don't allow it.
I'm sorry.
But check the description of this video to join the Romance Audiobook Insiders and get details on how you can get the steamy scenes in future.
If you're already a member, the love scene reference is Baby for the Bear, Chapter 6, Love Scene 4.
Okay, back to the story.
Chapter 7. Samantha awoke to the first tenuous rays of light before dawn. She shifted a bit under the sheets and immediately said, Ow!
Hi again, it's another adult scene we've had to take out. If you're a Romance Audiobook Insider, the love scene references Baby for the Bear, Chapter 7, Love Scene 5. Okay, back to the story.
To go to breakfast in the kitchen, Ken pulled on just his slacks and Samantha donned just Ken's shirt, keeping the upper buttons alluringly open. Samantha was mildly surprised that Ken did not attack and maul her one more time in the bedroom before going to the kitchen for breakfast. But at least for the moment, the bear was hungry for something other than her. Ken sat with her at the kitchen table, looking more interested in her muffins than the blueberry and cranberry ones they were having with their eggs, and said, Tomorrow, when we go over to my place, I want you to pack some things to come and stay for a week. A whole week, Samantha replied, her heart leaping a bit. A week, he said. I work and exercise in the same place where I live. I just go downstairs to work. I go upstairs to come home. I want to come home to you for a while. I'll get you a membership in a gym that I know near me that has a pool. You'll want to keep up with your swimming while I'm at work. But when I come home, I want you there ready for me. The meaning of that last part shone in his eyes. What could a girl say to a request like that? Are you going to send for the limo to pick us up? She asked. And I'm clearing tomorrow morning for more of what we're doing today. I call it my cave in the sky, Ken said, carrying Samantha's big leather travel bag, as they stepped off the elevator into his living room. Some cave, said Samantha, walking slowly into the penthouse with him and having her first look around. This was her first visit to a penthouse. She refused to behave like some common middle-class girl, excited to be in ultra-luxurious surroundings that looked like the fortune that they cost. The whole way over from her apartment to here, she had prepared herself to be quietly impressed. And she was. The penthouse was 2 levels with a long, gentle staircase leading from the lower, where they were in the living room, to the upper. One entire wall was made up of windows from floor to ceiling, looking out on the city. It was the most wide-open living space Samantha had ever seen. Over there, he gestured to a threshold leading to another part of the place, is the kitchen and dining room area, the library, the home theater, and the gym. Upstairs, he pointed to that gently sloping staircase, are the bedrooms, the upper baths, and the sauna and hot tub. There's a lot of room in every space. I like room. It's a big cave. You'll have the run of the place when I'm not here. Help yourself to anything you like. She did a turnaround, calmly taking it all in, refusing to display the excitement bubbling up in her as if she were the winning contestant on a game show. The place was stunningly fabulous. Samantha almost heard bells and winter music going off in her head. When she came to a stop looking at Ken, he added, "When I'm here, of course that you'll be helping yourself to me." He said it with the same expression he'd worn at breakfast. I don't wear a lot of clothes at home, most of the time. I usually go in just a pair of jeans or my underwear. Or nothing. Samantha broke into a ridiculous grin. You go around this place all the time naked? Or next to it? I don't need clothes when it's just me. And I don't need them for the kind of company I usually have and what I do with them. And I'm sure as hell not going to need them when it's just you and me. His look and his tone practically made her toes curl in her shoes. A fantasy penthouse, occupied by a spectacular-looking naked man, and all of it and him at her service. Samantha had truly stepped into a waking dream. But it made something occur to her. Ken? She began. Yes. I just realized something. What's that? I know we've just gotten together and just gotten started. But I just realized that I haven't seen you, that way. That is, the other way you are sometimes. Oh, right. You've seen me in my birthday suit, but not my bare skin. He paused, sighing mildly. Well, since we're getting naked anyway, we can take care of that upstairs. He tilted his head to the stairs. Come on. And so Samantha, with Ken carrying her bag, climbed the stairs for the upper level of the penthouse. Her skin tingled on the way up at the thought of being with the sexy beast in his lair. The master bedroom suite, not at all to her surprise, was as wide open and sumptuously furnished as the living room. It had a bookcase and another wall of windows and marble walls. Into one wall, a 60-inch television and a gas fireplace were set. Opposite these were a bed larger than king size. It looked big enough for 3 people.
Hi again. Unfortunately, there was another adult scene here which we've had to take out. If you're a romance audiobook insider, you can log in and hear it now. The love scene references Baby for the Bear, Chapter 7, Love Scene 6. If you're not yet a romance audiobook insider, check the description to join now. Okay, back to the story.
Oh, Ken, she sighed deeply under him. Sammy, he whispered on top of her. Beautiful Sammy, so beautiful. And they were quiet, still, and contented for a while. It was only Ken's need to go downstairs to the corporate offices that got them out of bed. He invited her to join him in the shower before he dressed, and she actually turned him down. Bad idea, with you needing to get back to work. He cocked an eyebrow mischievously at her. Are you insinuating that I, who run a multi-billion-dollar company, don't have any discipline? Samantha grinned crookedly back at him while slipping into a robe that she'd packed. Pointing to a critical part of his anatomy, she answered, I'm saying there's one part of you that doesn't have the same discipline as the rest of you. Ken mock frowned back at her. You know me too well, damn it. "We've been getting acquainted a lot," she said, pretending to be miffed, but reflecting her crooked grin back at her. He stomped away to the master bath just off the master bedroom suite. "You know I'll be getting you in the shower," he said as he went. "And the bathtub. And in the sauna. And yes, yes, yes." She sighed at him while digging in her travel bag for her slippers. She flopped back down on that huge bed, pulled on her slippers, and shut her eyes at the sound of the shower coming on. Behind her closed eyes, she saw Ken stepping into the water and lathering up that body she was enjoying so much, and cursed herself a bit for appealing to his businesslike discipline. She leaned back onto the side of the bed that he had occupied only a moment ago and felt the last of his warmth on the bedspread. And his words came back to her. "I hope it takes a good long time to get you pregnant." Samantha could not have agreed more. Once he was showered and dressed in a fresh suit, Ken took her on a proper tour of the penthouse and showed her where everything was. Then she walked him to the elevator door, and there they paused. Ken put his arms around the small of Samantha's back and promised, "I'll only be a few hours. I'll be right back up here, and I'd love to find you upstairs in that bed waiting for me when I get back." Looking off a bit, with the same mischief with which he'd addressed her earlier, Samantha said, That I might be." "What have you got in mind, Sammy Vance? You're not planning to get yourself into any trouble while I'm gone." "Well, it's such a big place with so many things to do. No telling what a girl might get herself into." Almost scolding, Ken said, "You know I want your sweet little blonde ass in that bed. Then you'd better get to work and hurry back, Mr. Brecker." Ken mock growled at her. "Have you forgotten who's the boss here?" Devilishly, Samantha replied, "Have you forgotten who's going to be the mama bear here?" And she tugged on his tie for emphasis. With a husky laugh, Ken said, "Oh, wait till I get back up here. You are so getting it." "I'd better be." He pulled her up and into a hard kiss that made Sammy curl one leg back like an ingenue in an old movie. She felt very much in danger of him stripping them both and shagging her right here on the spot, which was why she made the most reluctant gesture of her life and pushed him away. "Back to work, Papa Bear," she admonished. Stepping back towards the elevator door and straightening his tie, he pressed the down button and shook his head and a finger at her. "Just a couple of hours. Be ready." She showed him a toothy grin as he disappeared into the elevator. Once Ken was gone, Samantha spun around and confronted the luxurious expanse of his penthouse by herself. "Oh, Ken Brecker, you have plans for me?" "I have plans for you, my big bear." And she scampered off in the direction of the kitchen. Just a few minutes past 6 in the evening, the elevator doors slid open and Ken stepped back into the penthouse. "Sammy," he called. There was no answer. He cast a smoldering look at the stairs. "You'd better be up there in that bed like I told you," he muttered, and made a beeline up to the master suite to find an unoccupied bed. "No, Samantha." He looked about, confused. Loosening his tie, he mumbled, "Where the fuck is this chick?" He got the tie and his jacket off and tossed them into the chair with his other suit that he had cast off earlier. He was on his way to the master bath to check whether she might be waiting for him in the tub as he'd hinted at earlier. In his trousers came a stirring at the thought of a little screwing on the plush bath mat as the perfect welcome home. He had his shirt off by the time he got to the bathroom door and glanced inside to find no Samantha. Scratching his head, Ken came back into the bedroom and tossed the shirt onto the same chair and called out loudly, "Sammy!" Samantha, mounted by his frustration for want of mounting her. He was ready to go back out to the stairs and call for her again when, from the corner of his eye, he noticed something. On the bed, on one of the pillows on the side where he'd lain with her earlier, was a note. Ken went to the bed and picked up the note, which was just 2 words. Dining room. In the dining room, the shirtless Ken found his long glass tables, his set of 8 imported upholstered chairs, his rack of imported wines, his fantastic chandelier sparkling from the ceiling, his wall of windows with a spectacular view of the city and Samantha, smiling over a dinner of steak, bread, and vegetables that she'd prepared from a raid of the refrigerator in the adjoining kitchen. "I thought I'd let you pick the wine," she said, laughing softly. Ken forgave her for not being in bed where he'd told her to be, and went to the wine rack to find something appropriate for Surprise steak dinner made by the woman you're trying to knock up. They took their time with dinner. Then Ken had her in bed. 3 times. 3 awesome, shouting, toe-curling times. After the 3rd time, they lay under the covers in dim lights and contented silence. She rested in the crook of his arm, grazing her fingers along the massive contours of his pecs and through his chest hair. Then he spoke her name. Sammy. Yes, Ken? She replied. You know what I'm thinking? She kissed his peck. You want to do it one more time. Okay, that, and dot something else. She lifted her head, genuinely curious. Something else? In bed? During non-business hours between the sheets with her, what could possibly be sharing equal time in Ken Brecker's head with sex? What is it? She asked. Sooner or later, he answered, making her all the more curious by looking not directly at her but out into the softly lit space. Not too soon, I hope. What's going on in this bed is going to make me a father. Me, a father. That's the idea, isn't it? Yes, but... He almost seemed to struggle with the next words. What the hell kind of father am I supposed to be? Now he did look at her, sincerely, seriously. Really, Sammy? How are fatherhood and I going to go together? You don't really believe you'd make a bad father, do you? She asked. Ken, you're good. You're kind. You're generous. You're disciplined outside of the bedroom. Did your father know how to be a good dad to you when you were just born? Nobody knows that. They figure it out as they go along. You'll get it. Will I? Because, my whole life up to this point, it's been about me. What I wanted, what I needed, not having to wait for it. Expecting everyone around me to know what they needed to know and do what they needed to do. Having a kid, it's all the way the opposite of that. There's going to be a kid in this penthouse, Sammy. A real live kid. And not just any kid, but a kid who's going to start turning into a little bear after his first birthday. It'll be like having 2 kids. One of them not human, and they're going to be running around this place, doing all kinds of things, getting into all kinds of things, making all kinds of racket. I can probably kiss the fortune that I spent to furnish and decorate this place goodbye. And my temper, Sammy, you've never seen me when I'm mad, in either of my bodies. It's not a pretty thing. How am I going to handle a kid? With my temper? With my being used to everything being a certain way that I want it? He put a hand over his eye and squeezed his brow as if he were in pain. Holy shit. Sammy, me and fatherhood? What the fuck was I thinking? Why didn't I just take my CEO salary and run? He waited for Samantha to answer, to say something. She didn't. She only lay there giving him the kind of expression one makes when trying not to break out into a broad smile or crack up entirely. What? He blurted. What? On the edge of mirth, Samantha said, That's really human of you. What are you talking about? Have you talked to your own father about being a father? If you haven't, I think you should. Because what I just heard, that was my father. She patted him on the chest while he stared at her, mildly dismayed. That was my dad. The night of my parents' 30th anniversary party, when he and Mom and everyone were all swapping stories about them and their marriage. The things you just said, those were all the same things my father said when Mom was expecting me. Well, not the part about the penthouse and the CEO salary, but the rest of it. My father said all those things. I think every man who's going to be a father says those things. Or at least thinks them. A man expecting to be a father, I don't care what species he is. I think all that stuff goes through his mind. She rustled his chest hair, comfortingly. It's natural. You'll be scared and nervous about it for a while. But when you get used to the idea, you'll look forward to all the things you'll do with your cub. My dad said it was like that for him when I was on the way. A little less worked up, Ken made a long, puffing exhale, as if breathing out his fears. The stuff I'll do with my cub, he repeated, helping him through his first change into a bear and back again. Having little father/son bear wrestling matches with him. Taking him camping and being bears with him out in the forest, and teaching him how to catch fish right out of a stream with his claws. Being a dad. Now his whole manner changed. Where he was shocked, anxiety-ridden, overwhelmed with the responsibility of it all. Now he was calmer, dreamier. Samantha watched years of good things unfold in Ken's imagination. So a son is what you want? Samantha asked. Ken snapped back to reality and turned sincere. Well, yeah. I mean, as a male, when I think about having a cub, I naturally think about it being a male. A boy. What if it turns out I can't help you with that? Oh, Sammy, listen. Listen, Sammy. I'll be grateful for whatever we have. If it's a girl, hell, men say they want sons all the time. But if I had a daughter, the kid would have me wrapped around her little claw. Weren't you and your dad like that? Rolling her eyes, Samantha said, well, not so much his claw, but I was sort of daddy's princess, like a lot of girls are. See, if we make a little girl cub, I'll be fine with it. It's the father part that matters. I do basically the same stuff with a girl as I do with a boy. And I'll love her no differently than I would a boy. He looked up at the ceiling. Having a cub, though, I'll have to do things to make the penthouse safe, or maybe buy an actual house somewhere. And maybe hire a nanny, a governess. So much to think about, and we're only at the part of trying to make the little fuzzball. Yeah, Samantha whispered, and she shifted from resting against his chest to lying down beside him and joined him in staring at the ceiling. Sammy? Ken said again. Yes, Ken. There's something else. What? He turned his head to the side to look over at her, took her hand, and replied, You. She looked over at him in return. Me? You. What about you? I'm doing it again, only thinking about what I'm going to want and what I'm going to need and how it all affects me. But what about you? Sammy, you're doing the most special, important thing in the world for me. Have I told you how grateful I am for that? You're going to go through all the things a pregnant woman goes through, including the delivery for me. I can't tell you what that means to me. Samantha squeezed his hand. I know. But maybe, Sammy, maybe we haven't thought this all the way through. We decided against the in vitro. We decided it'd be better for us if we did it naturally. We've been loving trying to do it naturally. And you know I'm going to take care of you all the way. But we haven't thought about or talked about what comes next for you. What comes next is we finish the arrangement, you take your cub, and we both get on with our lives. Her voice choked a bit as she said it, and Ken caught it. You hear that? You hear what you just did? We're just putting it out here now. But Sammy, this might have more of an effect on you than you think it will. You're going to be carrying this cub, taking care of yourself to take care of it, dealing with the whole experience of being pregnant. And then, Sammy, you're going to become a mother, just like I'm going to become a father. This cub will be a part of both of us. It would have still been a part of us if we'd done it the other way, but doing it this way, we're both going to feel that. And under the arrangement we have, you don't have any obligation to the cub or me once you've given birth. But Sammy, be honest. Can you walk away and not have anything to do with the cub or me after all this? Now all the fears and anxieties that had plagued Ken only a moment ago came rushing in on Samantha like roaring waves of the ocean. Giving voice to them brought them thundering down and cascading on top of her. This whole thing had evolved in a particular way, first from an almost impersonal exchange. A transaction of cash, eggs, and sperm, and a deposit into her by a medical procedure. Then it became something much more intimate, more personal, with the doctor eliminated as the middleman, so to speak, and the whole thing carried out by them alone, by the meeting of their bodies. And what a beautiful meeting it was. The greatest pleasure, joy, and satisfaction of Samantha's life. Up to this moment she had thought of it all only in terms of the rewards. Physical, sexual, monetary. It had been a way of ensuring a good life for herself. But now the reality of the other life that was involved, and what that life would mean to her and to Ken, was flooding her heart even as Ken's seed flooded her womanhood each time he came into her. With a sharp inhale, she put a hand to her mouth and rolled to one side, away from him. Seeing Samantha lying next to him and turning away in sudden pain drove a spike of pain through Ken's own heart. He reached for her, put a hand on her shoulder, and snuggled closer to her. Fearing the question but needing to ask it all the same, he did. Sammy, oh, you really think you can do this? What choice do I have? She said, with her back to him and the pain ringing in her voice. We made the agreement. Agreements can be unmade. Now she did turn back to him, and her eyes were wet. And what happens to me then? We can make another agreement, another arrangement. Bitterly, she asked, You mean like a severance? A severance for an employee? Or what, like a kill fee for someone working freelance? We wouldn't have to be that cold about it. But that's what it would be, wouldn't it? She sounded so stung. Ken hated to hear her this way. A lump sum payment, and then we go our separate ways, right? He paused for a very thoughtful moment. In the silence, in which he hoped she would not begin to cry because that would truly tear him to pieces, he tried to gather the right words. Finally, his thoughts gave him the words he hoped were the ones he needed. Samantha. He went back to her full name again, meaningfully. I don't think of you as a contractor. That's not how I see you. After the way we've been, in your bed and mine, I don't think of you that way at all. Then what am I to you, really? And what will I be if we still go through with this? You'll be the woman who did for me the most important thing in my life. Someone that I'll always care about, who'll always matter to me. And if you want, you can be a part of the Cub's life. Help me raise it. Be there for it. Be its mother, you mean? That's what you would be, Sammy. Little him or her would be a part of both of us. And what would I be to you? Just the mother of your cub? With what visitation rights? You'd have custody, and I'd be like a glorified governess who just happened to bring him into the world. Ken exhaled heavily, a heaviness of the heart. Sammy, I don't know, we'd have to figure that out. But we would be a family. We'd have 9 months to work out the whys and hows of it all. We'll have longer than that because we don't know how long it'll actually take to get you pregnant. But I think this is worth doing. He squeezed her shoulder as if to press the meaning of his words through the touch of their skin. Samantha, I chose you to be my cub's mother because I didn't want it to be anyone else. And I still don't. I want it to be you. I want my cub to come from the way we enjoy being when we're in bed. Our connection, me connecting with you. I want this, Sammy. And I hope you still want it because I don't want to start over. Be with me. Figure this out with me. Turn this into something good with me. What do you say? Samantha had no words for that. The whole thing had grown so complicated now. It now had different sides to look at, and she wasn't ready to look at it all yet. The one thing that was not complicated was the feeling she had when she looked at Ken, when she listened to him, when she touched him, and the way it felt a moment later, when he pulled her closer and kissed her, long, warmly, tenderly. That was now the only thing that did not confuse her.
Hi again. Unfortunately, there was another adult scene here which we've had to take out. If you're a romance audiobook insider, you can log in and hear it now. The love scene references Baby for the Bear, Chapter 7, Love Scene 7. If you're not yet a romance audiobook insider, check the description to join now. Okay, back to the story.
I'll take that as a yes.
Chapter 8. Samantha awoke, her eyes fluttering open, to the soft touch of Ken's fingers on her shoulder.
Oh no, it's about to get hot, but we can't put this on YouTube as they don't allow it. I'm sorry, but check the description of this video to join the Romance Audiobook Insiders and get details on how you can get the steamy scenes in future. If you're already a member, the love scene reference is Baby for the Bear, Chapter 8, Love Scene 8. Okay, back to the story.
I still won't be able to think, knowing you're right over there in the shower. You don't want to leave, do you? You just got here. No. Listen, I'll go to the other bedrooms and think for a while. You just get your shower and go on down to the offices. I need to be by myself. She let him see the sincere and genuine need on her face for what she was asking. Please? Sammy, he argued, not forcefully but firmly, that last night it was as good as ever. If we just remember how good it is, I know we can work anything out. She replied, I used sex last night to avoid what we were talking about. Yes, it was good. You are always wonderful, Ken. But it's wrong to hide behind that. I need to think. Can you just let me think? Ken frowned a bit, not so much with anger as with acceptance. Okay. You go on ahead to another bedroom if you want. I'll go on to the shower. He pulled down his portion of the covers, and before he slid to the far side of the bed he put a hand warmly and firmly on her shoulder and said, "When you're done thinking, I really want to talk some more. We have something here that's important, Sammy, important to both of us. Can you please not shut me out?" He leaned over and kissed her softly on the cheek. "Please?" Unable to resist touching that gorgeous unshaven face, Samantha said, "Okay." She watched him slide out of bed and walk across the suite, so wondrously and awesomely naked, with the thing that had been giving her such incalculable pleasure swinging between his thighs, and something inside her wept. Samantha wanted so much to call him back to bed, to tell him she was sorry, to do what they both wanted her to do and have him do to her what she'd grown to crave so much. But that would only muddle the issue and delay the inevitable. What was on her mind was not about to go away. Once Ken was in the bathroom and Samantha heard the shower water running, she climbed out of bed herself, found her robe, and left the master suite for another room in the upper level of the penthouse. In the shower, enveloped in a wet cascade of water that was a poor substitute for the wetness he most wanted to experience, Ken leaned against the wall with one hand and took in his other hand the throbbing hugeness that was not about to get what it wanted. The sound of the shower drowned his muttering voice. "Shit, Sammy. Don't do this to us." He put on a suit and walked down the hall to look for her. He found her in another of the bedrooms, the smaller but still spacious and commodious rooms for visiting family and business associates who sometimes stayed overnight. She was sitting up on the bed with legs folded and arms around her legs, as if to make her folded body a barrier against the world. Nothing, he thought, should ever come between his body and Samantha's. Not even Samantha herself. Staying in the doorway, Ken asked, "Are you okay?" She looked over and nodded to him. Samantha knew that all she had to do was say the word and Ken would make himself late for work. Instead, she replied, "I'm fine. Have a good day." She could tell her smile looked as forced as it felt. "If you need me for anything, call me. Anytime, no matter what." "I will," she said. He lingered in the doorway just long enough to watch her look away from him and retreat into her thoughts. Ken hated the sight, the idea, of her looking away from him. She should be doing everything with him. And letting him do everything with her. But the office was calling his name and he tore himself away. Not seeing but sensing that he was gone, Samantha buried her face against her knees. Everything was going so well until last night. She was as uncertain now as she'd been when she first acted on the crazy impulse to answer his advertisement. The uncertainty gnawed at her. Why couldn't Ken Brecker be just a hot guy that she met at a recruitment event for job seekers? It would all be so simple then. He would give her his card. Perhaps she would email him. He would invite her for drinks. They would come back here, or go to her place. He would fuck Samantha in a normal relationship, without any thought of getting her pregnant. She would protect herself, get a morning after pill, a diaphragm, a prescription. They would date and sleep together. There would be none of the uncertainty about what it would all mean when she got pregnant and after the cub was born. They would face only the uncertainties that any other couple faced. Instead, there was all of this. Neither of them had given any thought to anything but his need for an heir and her need for a livelihood. And perhaps they should have. Perhaps Ken could have chosen someone else to carry his cub through in vitro and Samantha to be the woman in his bed. But that was all an invention of her mind. She had no reason to think that anything like what she was imagining would actually happen. In all likelihood, nothing like that would ever happen at all. Very likely the only way she could ever know Ken Brecker and share a bed and mind-exploding sex with him would be the way it had happened. The problem was that the way it had happened had pitfalls and consequences that the billionaire Werbear and the job-challenged blonde, both with such good heads on their shoulders, had utterly failed to consider. Samantha felt as though she had betrayed herself. Now she could end up betraying both of them. It was a busy day at Brecker International. Ken had back-to-back meetings and conference calls, and a business luncheon that he hosted in his office suite. Also, there was Reese checking in to confirm their next workout and sparring session. With everything else going on in his life since he set out to become a father, Ken had almost forgotten about his bare times with Reese. That, he knew, was a no-no. Neglecting the fitness of his human body was not conducive to the things that Ken most loved to do with it. Females enjoyed his perfect man shape, and he most enjoyed the pleasure they took from it and he from them. Especially, lately, one female in particular. At stray moments through the day, Ken's thoughts turned to the blonde that he left upstairs. What was his Sammy doing? Was she still in that bedroom where he'd left her alone, where he'd wanted to climb into that bed with her and remind her of how good they were together until they collapsed into a panting heap? Was she in the bath, the hot tub, the sauna? Or sitting in the living room, where he would love to be rolling around with her on the carpet, or having her straddle and ride him in one of the chairs, or humping the daylights out of her on one of the sofas? Or curled up in the home theater, having called up on Hulu some chick flick about a romantic human guy doing to some human female all the things Ken wished he were doing to her? What was she up to? He stole a couple of moments during the day to text her, to tell her that he was thinking of her, to reassure her that they would be all right and everything really would work itself out. She did not text back, which made him feel as though his insides were twisting into knots. Come on, Sammy, tell me something. I'm right here, just tell me something. But no answer came. He stole another few minutes to contact a florist and have some flowers delivered to his office suite, which he would take upstairs to her at the end of the day. Perhaps he'd even take her out to dinner. Flowers and dinner would get them talking again. Just the time spent together would put Samantha's mind in a better place. And her mind being in a better place would put them in the place where he most wanted them. Yes, he was sure of it. This was just a momentary rough patch. They would both get over any misgivings, and by tonight they would be back in his bed and he'd be on top of her, making up for lost time. Yes, Ken was sure of it. All of this would sort itself out by tonight. With the florist's most expensive bouquet in hand, Ken strode out of the elevator and called, "Sammy." Only silence answered him. He stood in the living room of a quiet penthouse, with sunset pinking and purpling the sky out the windows. "Sammy," he called again, a little more tentatively. And he listened. No sound came from anywhere. No music or sounds of television or films wafted out of the theater. There were no muffled noises of water running upstairs, or the clatter of activity in the kitchen. And there was no voice of a 24-year-old blonde calling back to him. Nothing. He looked to the stairs and the upper level beyond them, where he saw no lights glowing. Perhaps she had only put herself down for a nap. Ken smiled a bit wickedly at that idea. He pictured Samantha, a literal Goldilocks, curled up with her head resting on his pillows. "Who's that sleeping in my bed?" Just like in that old story, he'd be a Papa Bear coming home to find this pretty girl in his bedroom. In the story, Goldilocks woke and was terrified at the homecoming of the bears. She screamed and ran away. This would not be like the story. He would find her up there, napping away, and he would join her. First he would strip himself naked. Then he would climb up onto the bed with her and wake her with a kiss, like in another fairy tale. His Sammy would wake to him and smile at him and his naked, erect readiness for her, and all would be forgotten. She would let him strip the clothes from her, and then he would mount his Goldilocks and enter her, and fill her with his warm bear porridge. Flowers still in hand, Ken took the stairs 2 at a time and bounded to the master suite. He hurled himself through the threshold, and found an empty room. No Samantha on the bed. No sounds or light in the bath to tell him she was there. No travel bag lying by the walk-in closet. She wasn't there. He lowered the hand with the bouquet in it and almost dropped it. In all the years that Ken had lived here, the penthouse had never felt so truly empty. Not caring about the flowers anymore, he tossed them into the nearest chair, pulled out his phone from his inner jacket pocket, and checked his messages again. No new messages. Not a word from her. Ken almost dropped the phone as he'd almost dropped the flowers. He felt as empty inside as the penthouse around him. Sammy, no. Don't do this, he whispered. The emptiness around him was painful and cold as an abandoned cave.
Chapter 9. Ken was in his charcoal gray Porsche, parked on the street outside her apartment after dark, when he finally got her on the phone. Sammy, don't hang up the phone. I've been texting you all day. I thought you'd be there when I got home. I'm parked outside your place right now. Let me come up. He looked out of the driver's side window, up to the window of her apartment where the light was on. He saw the silhouette of a long-haired girl with a phone to her ear come to the window, pull aside the curtains, and peek down into the street. Ken, said her voice on the other end. I don't think you should. I still need to be by myself for a while. So that's why you left? Without even telling me? Not a text, not a voicemail, anything? I just come up and find you've cleared out? If you'd still needed time to yourself and wanted to come back here, you could have told me and I would have brought you. There was no need for you to just disappear like that. He looked up at the window again. The silhouette was still there, motionless. Let me come up. You should go, Ken. Her voice came over his phone. I'll get in touch after I've done some more thinking. Please. Sammy. Samantha. I'm here now. I was worried when you weren't there when I got home. I'm staying right here. I'll stay all night and be here in the morning if I have to. Let me come up. And again he looked up at her window. Her shape behind the curtains seemed to be wavering, as if she wanted to pace around the room, wrestling with her thoughts. In his mind he called out to her, Come on, Sammy. I'll do it. You know I will. I'll stay parked right here or I'll drive around and circle this block all night. At last her voice returned, sounding somber. All right, come up, Ken. A few minutes later, after ringing him up, she opened her apartment door and there he was, in his jacket, shirt, slacks, shoes, and no tie, with the upper buttons of his shirt open. Why did he have to come over? It pained her to see this unbelievably gorgeous man standing there, so obviously wanting her. She let him in and closed the door. I'm sorry I left without saying anything, she said. How are you doing? He asked. I'm all right, Ken. I've just been thinking about things. About all of it. Thinking is good, he said. But it would help things if we talked. I wanted to talk some more. I'm sorry. I just wasn't ready. I'm ready. I'll be ready whenever you are. Sammy, I need you to know it's not just the cub that's important to me. It's you. Not just as the one who's going to carry my cub, I hope, but for yourself. Care about you. I have all along. She sat down on the sofa. Ken stayed standing. He tried to read her expression, her body language, for anything that would tell him that she felt something besides confusion and doubt. At the moment, he couldn't find it. If you're not ready to talk, he said, maybe you can just listen. I didn't come over here just to turn around and go home. So maybe you can listen to me. All right, she replied. Okay, then. He paused for a beat, searching for the words. I've been going over everything we said before, last night. I think maybe there were some things we should have said differently or maybe not said at all. Well, no, maybe it's not that we shouldn't have said them, but now they've been said. He stumbled over his own thoughts. Sammy, that idea came up about you just having the cub and handing it over, like it was a project you'd taken on for me, and about you not having any other obligations after the project was done. I think that was the wrong way to think about it. And I asked you if you thought you could really do it, and the whole thing just snowballed from there. We started tripping over all these feelings. And then tried to cover it up with sex, she cut in, which was fantastic. And I'm not sorry about that. I'm never sorry about that. But you're right. We just covered it all up. Sammy, I'm not interested in covering anything up now. We need to have these things out. It's important to us, important to our future. Yours, mine, ours. Both of us. What's wrong is that we've been going about this as if it were a business. Like everything else you do, said Sammy. This isn't business. This is life. You're right, he granted sincerely. And it's not the kind of life I was ever prepared for, where having a baby is like making some kind of deal. It's not a deal, and it's not a relationship between a contractor and a client. It's a child. And when we talked about what kind of relationship I'd have with the child, if I had any kind of relationship at all, if I were any part of its life. Ken, I never saw myself as a mother who visits her child. A child is this little person you live with and love and care for, not someone you drop in on. I appreciate that, said Ken. And Ken, there's something else. It's not about you or the cub or the whole arrangement. It's about me. What is it? I'm not ready to be pregnant yet. That's the biggest thing I've had on my mind. This isn't the time for that, for me. I'm 24 years old. Ken. Just 24. I haven't even started really living yet. This isn't the time for me to be thinking about marriage. The whole thing started because I was out of a job, and we're both past holding you responsible for that. But right now, things are about making a life for myself, not making another life. And all that went off the rails when I lost my job. I was scrambling for something else, and what came along was you. I'm not even ready to be married yet. And here I was, thinking about having a baby. Ken, that's a huge thing. It's bigger than I thought it was. Into her mind through the back door came the thought of something else huge that was bigger than she expected. And she ignored it. This isn't a 24-year-old thing, Ken. How old are you? 30. 29, he said. Going on 30. That doesn't put us that far apart, Sammy. 5 years, 6 years, it's not that much. But it's enough that we're not exactly on the same page. For you, this is a time when there's a thing you're ready for and a thing you need, and you need someone who's ready to give it to you. And I'm not. This was a mistake. You should find someone else. For Ken, this moment was as if she had reached into his chest and squeezed his heart. Find someone else? Really? When she was the one who'd somehow reached him in a way that no one else among the countless women he'd slept with had ever done. When she had so quickly become the only one he could even think about. How could she look him in the eye and tell him he should find someone else? I don't think it was a mistake, Sammy, said Ken. He tilted his head towards the bedroom. We spent most of 2 days in that bed in there, and half a day and a night in my bed, and not one time was a mistake. Not one time out of all that was wrong. Not when it was that good. Not when it was that fucking incredible for both of us. When has anyone ever fucked you the way I did? When was it ever anywhere near as good for you as it was with me? I'll tell you this, Sammy. You're the best I've ever had, and I've had plenty. That's no lie. I've never had it like I've had it with you. And I'm sorry, to me that's got to mean something. I asked myself whether it was because we were trying to get you pregnant or whether it was just you or just us. And you know something? I don't care. It's something I want. It's something I don't want to give up. The sex isn't the problem, Ken. You're right, that's been the best. The problem is everything else we both need. You need to be a father. I need a life. Those things, they don't match up. Ken hung his head for a moment. This was getting them nowhere, but he still refused to let go. He still wanted to hang on with the tenacity of the bear that he was. You're right about one thing, he allowed. You're not 25 yet. I'm almost 30, and my needs are changing. One thing about me is definitely changing. I need to feel the way I've felt with you. Since we started going to bed, I've felt myself becoming someone I never was before. And it's someone that I liked. Someone who's not into fucking around all the time, but wants to stay with one person. You want to talk about needs? That's what I need. But you still need to be a father, and I'm not ready to be pregnant. It wasn't that long ago I was a kid myself. I want to know what it's like to be just an adult for a while, before I become a mother even in this way that we're talking about. This is the wrong time for me, Ken. I keep coming around to that. I'm not the one you need. He shook his head at her, despairing that she was either unable or unwilling to understand. He desperately needed her understanding and he didn't know how to get it. "You're so wrong about that, Sammy. I do need you. I really do." Samantha's lip quivered in a way that tore Ken to shreds inside. More than anything, he wanted to come around the coffee table and gather her up in his arms, and hold her and kiss away every last one of her doubts, and then strip the two of them, lay her down on that sofa, and show her exactly how much he needed her. But he stood his ground until it finally became clear to him that this visit to her apartment was not going anywhere he wanted to go. And Ken Brecker at last did something that he had never done in all his life. He gave up. Instead of giving voice to his defeat, though, he said one last thing. "You know where to find me, Sammy." With a lump in her throat, Samantha watched him turn and go back to the door. She watched him open it and stand in her threshold, looking back at her with a sadness unlike any other sadness that she had ever seen. Then he closed the door and she sat still with the sound of his retreating footsteps in the hall. She stayed still, there on the sofa, imagining what was about to happen outside. Ken walking back to his car, getting in, pulling out of the parking space in front of her building, driving off into the night without her. And she glanced over at the doorway to her bedroom, where she would be spending the night without him. And Samantha Vance began to cry.
Chapter 10. It was not the kind of body slam that Ken liked best. For the moment, however, the thunderous, bone-rattling collision of two bare forms was something that he needed. Sparring and grappling with Reese was helping him burn off energy and smash, however symbolically, into his frustrations. Every crunching impact was a blow against the impasse in which he had left things with Samantha. Ken did not like situations without solutions, problems without fixes. He had tried his best with Samantha, but her emotional wall of doubts and expectations had proven to be as stubborn as an old tree that resisted being knocked over in the forest, and as painful and bothersome as the bees buzzing in a hive. Trees held beehives and beehives contained honeycombs. Ken wanted a honeycomb with long, blonde hair and a curvy body. But it was up a difficult tree and he'd been stung badly trying to get it. Honeycombs high in trees and the bees in them were the bane of a bear's life. So, with the full force of a very frustrated bear, Ken reared up on his hind legs and slammed into Reese with all his might. Reese held his ground and the two of them strained at each other, their massive bare bodies pushing and lurching, their powerful bare muscles exerting all their power to get the upper hand or the upper claw over the other. They roared and bellowed monstrously at each other, showing lethal fangs in wide-open ursine mouths. They huffed and puffed, each straining to knock over his opponent. Reese knew the rules very well. Restraint was only for fangs and claws. It was a duel of mass and muscle, and Ken's position as the boss was irrelevant. He must fight to win, though today Ken was proving a greater challenge than usual. Though ursine in form, Ken was still human in mind, and in his human mind he railed with all of his wounded pride. "How could you do this, Sammy? How could you send me away? How could you ignore how much we want each other? You let me go. You didn't talk it out with me the whole way. You didn't let us find our way together. How could you?" No answers were forthcoming. The answers lay only with Sammy, and she wasn't here. There was only Ken and Reese in this room, and there was nothing to do now but slam together and grapple with each other in ways that would burn off Ken's energy, but not give him what he needed most. So when the two great bears toppled to one side and crashed to the floor, the thunder of their fall muffled by the mats, Ken, puffing hard, pulled away from Reese and the two of them rose up, grunting, to all fours and circled each other. And with a raucous bellowing, Ken stood upright yet again, and Reese answered him, and the two bears charged and collided and locked themselves together in another mass of heaving, fur-covered muscles. Sammy's voice buzzed in his mind like the droning of bees defending the honey. "I'm not the one you need." She actually told him that, after the way they'd been together. "I'm not the one you need." Ken roared all the more loudly, as if to topple Reese with his voice alone. Like hell you're not, the voice of his own mind said to the woman who'd actually sent him away. "You think you're not what I need? What about what you need, Samantha Vance?" Because I don't even want to hear that I'm not what you need. After everything that went on in your bed, in my bed, I'm not hearing that we don't need each other. Your beautiful blonde ass belongs to me whether you know it or not." And he roared out his need again. Reese heaved and shoved forward with every bit of his bearish strength, and Ken, his muscles set to the task but his mind filled with Samantha, swayed back like the honey tree struck by lightning. He crashed hard and rolled onto one side, then onto his stomach. Reese thudded back down to all fours and stood that way, waiting for Ken to get up one more time. Ken lay still on the mats, huffing, puffing, groaning bear groans. Reese waited and Ken stayed just as he was, and commanded his ursine body to morph. His huge, fur-covered form melted down to the more compact frame of a muscular human male and his head, neck, and limbs changed accordingly. In a few seconds, Kenneth Brecker the man lay naked and breathing heavily where Kenneth the bear had been. Taking that as his cue that the match was over and he was the victor today, Reese stood on hind legs again and changed himself. Now, in place of bears, there were two strikingly handsome, naked figures of muscle in the gym. Reese walked over to where Ken lay, bent down a bit, and offered the boss his hand. With a final puff, Ken took Reese's hand and accepted the help back to his feet. "Thanks, man," said Ken. "This one's yours." "Hard fight as usual," said Reese. And the two of them retreated to the respective walls where they had left their gym clothes. They both got back into short shorts, and Ken sat himself down again with his back to the wall, picking up the bottle of water that he'd brought with him and taking a long swallow. Reese squatted down in front of Ken and took a good, long look at the boss. He did not completely care for what he saw. Ken Brecker was ordinarily the most focused person Reese knew, always completely in the moment, always totally in the game. The man sitting here now was a Ken more distracted, more disquieted and ill at ease than Reese had ever seen him, as if he were completely here physically but otherwise somewhere else, somewhere that he didn't like at all. "Tell me it's none of my business, if you want. But is everything okay?" Reese asked. Ken pondered exactly what to say and then replied, "Everything's. I don't know how everything is, Reese. Maybe I'm just a big spoiled cub. I've been used to having things my own way and having what I want, when I want it. I'm not used to anything else. Maybe this is a wake-up call for me." He paused, then added with a weary chortle, "or a grow-up call. Is this anything to do with what you were mentioning before, about wanting to hire a surrogate to have your cub for you?" Almost snorting, Ken replied, "You might say that." Making a crooked smile and shaking his head, Reese guessed, "Don't tell me, it's not working out the way you planned because you decided not to do it the way you planned." Ken did not answer in words, only with a mortified look. "Look, tell me to fuck off if you want, but I thought from the start that was the wrong way to go. You tried to make it neat and simple and uncomplicated, and you couldn't do it. Getting someone pregnant artificially, that's not for you. But I didn't say anything because you're the boss. But to be honest, I'm not surprised." Ken frowned, agreeing. "I shouldn't be, either. I should have known better. But here I am. You know something, though?" "What's that?" "Everyone, sometime in his life, should be laid the way I've been with this one woman. Everyone should experience that one perfect someone in bed, the one who's the best there can be for you. I've just had that. And I don't know if I can get it back. Ken, again, you can tell me to fuck off. But I'm surprised to hear you talk this way, you of all people. Yeah, it's true you're used to getting things you want and getting things your own way, and part of that is because you were born into it. But man, I've seen you work your ass off to prove you deserved it. And I've seen you work your ass off to take what you were born with and make it better. Why should this thing with this woman be any different? You're the biggest, baddest bear in the forest. Why don't you just go get her? Shaking his head, Ken said, "You're right, I know. But if this were the forest, it'd be exactly that simple, going and getting her, maybe fighting off another bear for her. That, I could handle. But this isn't the forest." Smiling with the corner of his mouth, Reese said, "It's a different kind of forest, that's all. Different kind of thing, same rules." He held up his hands, a conciliatory gesture against offending the boss. "Just my opinion." "Not a bad opinion after all," said Ken. The two man-bears got themselves back on their feet and made for the shower. It was the last hour of the workday and there were still some things that Ken wanted to attend to in the office. As he strode towards Pamela's desk and his own office door beyond her, Pamela looked up at him, adjusted her glasses, and announced, "Mr. Brecker, there's someone waiting for you inside." Ken was startled. He pointed to his door. "Inside? You just let someone in?" "I didn't have any appointments for this time," Pamela said. "She insisted on waiting for you in there. And she said you wouldn't mind." The boss bear's mouth dropped open, but no words tumbled out. He blinked and headed right for his door. Inside the office, there she was, dressed in an off-white suit and white blouse, with that blonde hair falling thickly over her shoulders and bosom, looking rather as if she were the CEO of Brecker American herself sitting behind his desk. In his chair. Ken shut the door behind him and walked towards the desk. "What are you doing there?" "I always thought I'd sit in a CEO's chair someday," answered Samantha. "I just thought I'd try it out." "How do I look?" He had to admit, she looked as if she did belong there or as if she would belong there in a few years. And, truth be told, she was not the first woman to sit in that chair. She was only the first woman to sit there with her clothes on. "How do you think you look?" he asked. And then, feeling as if that were the wrong tone to take, he followed with, "You look fine. You look. It looks right." And he meant it. "Thank you," she said, rising. Tapping the back of the chair, Samantha said, "But this is yours. One day I'll have one of my own, but this is yours." "I don't doubt it for a minute," Ken thought, coming around the desk to where she was standing. He reached for her, wanting to sweep her into his arms. To his surprise, Samantha put a hand on his chest to block him. "We have to talk some more." Ken accepted this and let her walk around the desk to where he'd been and sit down opposite him. He took his own seat, and there they were, right back where they started. "Okay," said Ken. "What's on your mind?" "I've been thinking some more about the things we said in my apartment," Samantha said. "Everything was about what I'm ready for. And what I thought I was ready for, and really wasn't. And the way I expected things to be, which they weren't. Ken, I think maybe you and I have something in common. We both go into things knowing how we want them to come out. And we both work hard to get things that way. And neither of us likes it very much when things aren't the way we planned. We couldn't be more different, you being what you are and me just being human. But I am human, Ken. And I want the things a human wants, and I expect the things a human expects." "I was just talking about this with someone else," Ken said. "About the difference between the wild and civilization. We agreed that the wild and civilization are different things that work kind of the same way. Bears in the forest and bears in clothes," he tugged at the lapels of his jacket, "are basically the same creatures. They want to eat, to overcome competition, and to pass on their genes. That's why my family wants me to have a cub, to make sure their genes are passed on. We dress it up with all kinds of civilized ideas, but we're animals. That's us, Samantha animals." Samantha heard this and accepted it. "You're an animal, all right. You are the hottest animal in the world. But what is it you expect?" he asked. Someday, Ken, Samantha answered, I want to be a mom. Not now, but not a long time from now either. I just want to be a mom after I've had some other things that a human wants. To meet someone that I like, that I know likes me back. To spend time together and learn things about each other. To make memories. And fall in love. Then, after that, all the rest of it. That's what I saw for my life. And the whole thing of making a baby with you, the way we were planning to do it. When we really started talking about what it meant, it just suddenly threw me. It wasn't the way I saw it. I get that, said Ken. But then, since you left my place and I had time to think about it some more, she continued, mentally adding, and cry my eyes out over it, there was one thing I kept coming back to. Ken, I wasn't ready for the thing we were trying to do, having a cub right away. But there is one thing I'm ready for. What's that? She gave him the most meaningful look that she'd ever given anyone in her life, and simply, decisively said, You. Ken had no answer for that. He just smiled and felt himself melt inside. I'm ready for you, Ken. I can't be the mother of your cub now, and I know that's what you really want. So if that's the only way we can be together, I understand and I'll just go. But I wanted you to know that the one part of what we had together that I was ready for. Was you. So you do want to be a mother? Ken asked. Someday, yes, she said. And can you see your someday being with me? I can't see it with anyone else, said Samantha. Ken leaned back in his chair. Samantha sat still, sensing the import of this moment, waiting for the next thing he would say, whatever it might be. Then there's just one last thing, he finally continued. One last thing we have to understand. It's something that's been like the invisible bear in the room that we know is there but haven't been talking about. A bit anxiously, Samantha asked, What's that? Flatly, directly, Ken asked her, Do you love me? Now it was Samantha's turn to sit back, caught completely unprepared. She tried to say something, but couldn't. He repeated, Samantha. Sammy. Do you love me? A dewy look came over her. In business terms, even though she had said and he had agreed that this was life and not business, this above all was the one thing to make or break any deal. Ken waited. Finally, Samantha spoke. Yes, Ken. I love you. And I love you, he said. I fell in love with you that first time in your bedroom. And I've loved you more and more every minute since. I love you and I want you. And I never want you to push me away or send me away again. If you do, I'll die. And the first rule of the forest is you don't let anything kill you. So you have to stay with me and you have to let me love you and you have to love me back. And then when we're both ready, we'll talk again about having our cub. Can you accept those terms? A little smile broke out on her face. She shook her head, knowing they were closing the deal. Yes, she said. I accept. He held out his hand to her across the desk. She thought he would shake her hand, very businesslike. Instead, he took her hand and kissed it, tenderly, warmly. Ken released her hand, picked up his phone, and said into it, Pamela, no calls, no visitors. No exceptions. He waited a beat for her to acknowledge, then hung up the phone. Then he opened the top drawer at one side of his desk and hit a button inside it. Over her shoulder, Samantha heard a little clack. She turned and looked in that direction, then back at Ken. Did you just... Locked the door, yes, to make doubly sure we won't be disturbed. Pamela will be going home soon anyway, but in business things come up. The day's almost over anyway, but I don't want anything coming up at the last minute. Samantha's eyes widened, showing her disbelief. But, Ken, you don't mean. He stood up, shrugged off his jacket, and loosened his tie. Yes. I mean. She gripped the arms of the chair and crossed her legs anxiously, as if they were not alone or someone might be watching, which was an irrational thought, but a natural one. But this is your office.
Hi there. Unfortunately, we've had to take this steamy scene out as it's against YouTube's terms of service.
If you don't want to miss out on love scenes in future stories, check the description and join the Romance Audiobook Insiders for more info.
If you're already a member, the love scene reference is Baby for the Bear, Chapter 10, Love Scene 9.
Okay, back to the story. A couple of months later, a most ironic position opened up at Brecker American, assistant to the Director of Human Resources. Samantha had some trepidation about taking the job, not because she could not do it, but because she was Ken's girlfriend and it might look like nepotism on his part. Ken did not care, he was the boss. Whoever didn't like it could add another line to his own resume and move on. The following year, 3 pregnancy kits showed positive. And that was the beginning of a new adventure. The end.
If you want more paranormal romances like this, please, my love, be sure to subscribe to the Romancely YouTube channel. I look forward to spending more time with you. Subscribe and let's make it happen.